Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dan Garodnick, Chair of the City Planning Commission and Director of the Department of City Planning. Welcome to today's review session of the City Planning Commission. Today's date is October 15, 2024. We are joined today by Vice Chair Knuckles, Commissioners Benjamin, Cerullo, Gold, Kermani, Marin, Osorio, and Rampersad on Zoom. And before we get to our agenda, I just wanted to mention some recent announcements that touch on the work of the Department of City Planning. Last week, we unveiled an installation in the City Hall Rotunda called Undesign the Red Line. Created by design studio Designing the We, the interactive exhibit traces the history of housing discrimination and segregation in New York City. Drawing connections to the city's current housing crisis, the exhibition offers important context for our efforts to take down exclusionary barriers through City of Yes for housing opportunity. The work to advance racial justice is more vital than ever, and by critically examining our history, this installation can help us craft the path forward. Members of the public can visit the installation by joining a public tour of City Hall. I'd like to express my thanks to AARP New York State Director Beth Finkel for co-authoring an op-ed in AM New York with New York City Department of the Aging Commissioner Lorraine Cortez Vasquez on how legalizing accessory dwelling units through City of Yes for housing opportunity will help seniors stabilize their finances, age in place, and provide room for families and caretakers. Too many senior New Yorkers live on fixed incomes and struggle to pay rent. We need to implement policies to support their housing needs, and that's exactly what City of Yes for housing opportunity will do. I'd also like to thank everyone who joined the Department of City Planning and Councilmember Natasha Williams earlier this month at our public workshop on the Jamaica Neighborhood Plan. If you couldn't make that in-person event, you can join an online workshop on Wednesday, October 23rd. Register at www.jamaicaplan.nyc. Moving to today's review session, we'll start with the Department of City Planning's Atlantic Avenue Mixed-Use Plan, also known as AIM Up. This community-led proposal would bring new homes, jobs, and infrastructure to a roughly 21-block stretch of Atlantic Avenue and neighboring blocks in Crown Heights, Bed-Stuy, and Prospect Heights. Since the 1960s, this area of central Brooklyn had been zoned for 1 to 2-story auto uses, storage, and industrial buildings, despite its excellent access to public transit and major job hubs. It's past time for a change, and that's exactly what AIM Up will deliver, transforming the corridor into a vibrant mix of residential, commercial, and manufacturing, including around 4,600 new homes, approximately 1,440 of them income restricted, as well as space for 2,800 new jobs. To help achieve this housing goal, the plan will maximize the number of income-restricted affordable homes that can be built on public sites in the neighborhood. Some of them are already moving forward and others are being explored. We believe this is a key step towards addressing the chronic shortage of homes of all types around the area where demand to live has skyrocketed and zoning has limited growth, putting pressure on the existing housing stock and tenants. With this proposal, we're continuing our work to generate new homes throughout New York City alongside our citywide initiative, City of Yes for housing opportunity. Both are part of our all-hands-on-deck approach to tackling the housing crisis. Another crucially important part of this plan is delivering infrastructure and streetscape improvements to help these communities thrive into the future and make Atlantic Avenue safer. As part of this plan, I am pleased to share today that the New York City Department of Transportation will install street safety improvement projects, including planters, bike corrals, and daylighting at intersections along Atlantic Avenue and nearby blocks to improve pedestrian visibility, safety, and accessibility. Through AIM Up, the city will also invest heavily in the public realm, including over $24 million in improvements to St. Andrew's Playground that will create a new synthetic turf multi-use field with a running track, upgrade the basketball and handball courts, renovate playground spaces, and add new seating, shade trees, plantings, and other green infrastructure. The administration is also committing to enhancing Lowry Triangle near Atlantic Avenue and Washington Avenue to help community members better enjoy and use this space. Other infrastructure work in the wider neighborhood includes storm water and sewer upgrades along Atlantic Avenue and Dean Street, as well as subsurface stormwater detention systems and more than 100 rain gardens. These investments, all of them together, will bolster sewer capacity and help these neighborhoods better handling flooding and storm events. In addition, the city's Department of Housing Preservation and Development is advancing anti-displacement efforts to support renters and homeowners in the area. These investments reflect a down payment of the city's commitment, with more to be considered as we go through public review. Building on over a decade of public engagement, this transformational plan would benefit Brooklynites for many years to come. We'll hear more on AIM Up in just a minute, but I would like to thank Council members Crystal Hudson and Chi Osei for their leadership here. I'd also like to shout out the New York City Council Land Use and Planning Division Facilitator WXY Studio, Community Boards 2, 3, and 8, our agency partners, and the entire Central Brooklyn community for their collaboration in crafting this thoughtful plan. I hope everyone will continue to make their voices heard as public review gets underway today. Finally, thank you to everyone at the Department of City Planning team who helped us to the starting line today, especially the Brooklyn team of Alex Summer, Karenza Wood, Bianca Bryant, Kyra Cuevas McCarthy, Jordan Frade, Demetrius McClester, and project leads Jonah Rogoff and Jesse Hirakawa. Thank you to all of you. Next up, we'll hear about a proposed mixed-use development at 10251 Queens Boulevard in Forest Hills. This project would create over 200 new homes, of which more than 50 will be income restricted. By including ground floor retail, the building will help keep this commercial corridor along the boulevard intact. The site is a couple of blocks from the 67th Avenue M and R train station, as well as Yellowstone Park. The Commission will then go over Community Board 5's recommendation on the conversion of vacant office space to nearly 40 new homes in the landmarked Flatiron Building at 175 Fifth Avenue. This proposal is up for a vote tomorrow. We'll also hold a follow-up discussion on what we heard at our recent public hearing on the replacement of the Port Authority bus terminal, a big proposal regarding one of the most significant transit hubs in the country. So, lots to do today. Sarah, let's go ahead and get the show on the road.
Good afternoon and welcome to the City Planning Commission Review Session for Tuesday, October 15th, 2024. The time is 1:11 p.m. and a quorum is present. The first item on our agenda is a certification of a zoning map and zoning text amendments, UDAP designations, project approval, dispositions of city-owned properties, and acquisitions in Brooklyn Community Districts 3 and 8. Our presenters are Alex Summer, Jonah Rogoff, Jesse Hirakawa, and Bianca Bryant.
Great. Welcome.
Testing.
All right.
All right. Good afternoon, Chair Gorodnick and Commissioners. I'm Alex Summer, Director of the Brooklyn office here at the Department of City Planning, and it's my pleasure to introduce the Atlantic Avenue Mixed-Use Plan to the Commission today for certification. This plan and its related actions, known as AIM Up, have come together over more than a decade of planning and outreach, culminating hundreds of hours of input and guidance from local residents, business owners, advocates, and elected officials, as well as a cadre of civil servants across multiple public agencies. And while we continue the much-needed work on the City of Yes initiatives, which are aiming to help address the dire citywide housing crisis with a little bit more housing everywhere, AIM Up demonstrates our continued commitment to neighborhood-based planning, housing growth and affordability through coordination of local land use changes, holistic public realm improvements, and infrastructure investments. As proposed, AIM Up would help create approximately 4,600 new homes, of which 1,440 homes would be permanently rent regulated and income restricted, and over 900,000 square feet of commercial, community facility, and industrial floor area, enough space for 2,800 new jobs. All told, we're making room for almost 13,000 people in an area that has excellent public transit and is close to services and jobs, but currently prohibits any new housing. Before we start, I'd like to introduce the Brooklyn office AIM Up team, which includes Jonah Rogoff, lead planner, Jesse Hirakawa, lead urban designer, as well as Bianca Bryant, Kyra Cuevas-McCarthy, Jordan Frade, and Demetrius McLester. We're also joined by Sarit Platkin and Alina Farishta from HPD, who are co-applicants on this proposal and will be helping us present today. Now, I'll briefly touch on the proposed actions and orient you all in the neighborhood context. To facilitate the AIM Up vision, the department is proposing a set of zoning map amendments to allow new housing and more jobs. Zoning text amendments to map mandatory inclusionary housing and make sure new buildings include permanent affordable housing, and the establishment of a new special Atlantic Avenue mixed-use district to create unique urban design and public realm standards and ensure a creative mix of uses. In addition, HPD and DCAS are co-applicants for some site-specific proposals, which need Urban Development Action Area Project UDAP designation, as well as acquisition and disposition actions to facilitate affordable housing developments across 5 sites. AIM Up covers approximately 21 city blocks along Atlantic Avenue in central Brooklyn, split roughly between Crown Heights and Prospect Heights in Community District 8 to the north, to the south, and Bedford-Stuyvesant in Community District 3 to the north. The area is represented by council members Crystal Hudson and Chi Osei. Atlantic Terminal Barclays Center in downtown Brooklyn are about 3 to 4 blocks to the west. Prospect Park and Eastern Parkway are about 7 to 8 blocks to the south. And the Nostrand Avenue LIR station and Bed-Stuy's Restoration Plaza are just to the east of the study area. Now that you're broadly situated, I'll briefly talk about today's agenda. First, we'll discuss the neighborhood's historic context and how we got here, and then a bit on the area's existing conditions. Next, we'll discuss the M-Crown and AIM Up public engagement process and the resulting community vision and prioritization report. And then finally, we'll walk through the proposed land use actions, as well as the capital planning initiatives and the draft environmental impact statement. Now I'll pass it over to Jonah, and we'll travel back in time to the early 1900s.
Thank you, Alex, and welcome. Thank you, commissioners. So historically, a freight and passenger rail ran at grade along Atlantic Avenue, bringing goods from Long Island to Brooklyn, and businesses along the corridor began to flourish. In the early 1900s, the rail's freight portion was discontinued, and the passenger portion, which would become the Long Island Railroad, or LIRR, moved underground. In the next few decades, car and truck use skyrocketed, with gas stations, auto repair shops, and garages clustering along the corridor. In 1961, the area was mapped as an M11 district, prohibiting new housing and enshrining the suburban-style auto-centric character. During this time, the city faced significant issues with white flight, population loss, and disinvestment. Within a quarter mile of AIM Up, the population declined by 29% during the 1970s, coinciding with restrictive zoning and many lots becoming vacant, open storage, and parking. In the 1980s, the population increased by 11%, partly due to immigration from Caribbean countries, and then stabilized and increased again from 2010 to 2020. This period also coincided with the mapping of contextual rezonings, which channeled investment to existing buildings, but limited new construction. Despite the growing demand to live in the surrounding neighborhoods, the M11 zoning in AIM Up has been and continues to be a barrier, resulting in little to no development since 1961. So next we're going to cover existing conditions. Borough-wide, we view AIM Up as part of a network of smaller neighborhood job nodes with strong access to transit, services, and amenities, and only a short commute to Lower Manhattan and downtown Brooklyn. AIM Up is well served by public transit within a quarter mile of many buses, subways, and the regional LIRR, and only a half a mile from the Atlantic Terminal Transit Hub. Surrounding land uses are primarily residential, with commercial along Fulton Street and corridors running north to south. Within AIM Up, there is a mix of parking and vacant land, warehousing and light industrial, offices and retail, community facilities, and residential, which is mainly the result of recent private applications and range from 2 to 4 story homes to 4 to 18 story apartment buildings. AIM Up is surrounded by areas either mapped as historic districts or contextually rezoned over the past 30 years. While these actions have helped preserve the built character, especially the brownstone character that many of us cherish, they've also limited opportunities to grow and meet rising demand for housing, despite some growth along certain corridors or projects like the state-led Pacific Park or Atlantic Yards. On the zoning map above, you can see these contextual zoning districts. Except for recent private applications, AMUP is mapped M11, a low-density manufacturing district that allows up to 1 FAR for commercial and industrial uses with a high off-street parking requirement and no height limit. Since 2019, 7 private applications have been approved in AMUP, as well as 3 more within a block, which generally mapped C63A along Atlantic Avenue and paired R7A districts to the south. While these private applications have added much-needed housing, they've not been able to unlock the area's potential in a holistic way, a key driving force for our neighborhood planning work. Now let's walk through the area as it stands today. Starting with Atlantic Avenue, this is looking east between Nostrand and Bedford Avenues, where the LIRR rises above grade. Moving a bit west along Atlantic, here's a view looking east at Franklin Avenue with the Bedford Atlantic Armory on the right. Continuing to move west along Atlantic, this is a view facing east between Grand and Classen Avenues. Further in the background is a 17-story building under construction that was facilitated by a private application. Now we're at the most western portion of the project area along Atlantic Avenue at Underhill Avenue. Oh, excuse me. This is looking west towards Atlantic Terminal. Towards the back on the left is a new high-rise building at Pacific Park, while on the right is a 29-story tower facilitated by a private application. Moving south, here we're along Dean Street, looking west between Grand and Classen Avenues. Moving east along Dean Street, this is a view looking east between Classen and Franklin Avenues with 1000 Dean Street on the right, a former industrial building converted to offices. For the north-south avenues, this is a view looking north along Grand Avenue at Bergen Street. Now we've moved north of Atlantic Avenue. Here we're along Herkimer Place, looking east towards Nostrand Avenue. As we transition to discussing housing trends, we want to underscore that demand for housing, especially affordable housing, has soared in the neighborhoods around AMUP and across the city, putting pressure on the existing housing stock. According to HPD's Housing and Vacancy Survey, as many of us know, only 1.4% of the city's apartments are available for rent, the lowest housing vacancy rate since recorded in 1968. Further, since the 1970s, housing completion has not kept up with population growth. As a consequence, over 50% of the city's renters are rent burdened, spending more than 30% of their income on rent, with a growing disparity between income to rent. In the community districts around AMUP, similar to the larger city, there's a large percentage of rent burdened residents, particularly in Community District 8. So how did we get here? As we said, the population for the area declined during the 1970s and never fully recovered. Since the 1990s across Brooklyn, contextual rezonings were focused on stabilizing these neighborhoods with contextual infill development, preserving neighborhood character and allowing for moderate growth, but leaving many of the neighborhoods unequipped to deal with unprecedented demand to live here. Between 2010 and 2020, the area saw a population increase of over 16,600, while only 8,700 new homes were built. And to round out our existing conditions, we estimate about 800 private sector jobs in the area, with the majority being in office, healthcare, retail, and commercial-based sectors, and about a third in construction, wholesale, manufacturing, and industrial-based sectors. From 2012 to 2022, there was a loss in industrial jobs, which we want to point out, while jobs in local services and office-based sectors did grow. Next, we're going to discuss our planning process and outreach. After the 2013 Crown Heights West rezoning, Community Board 8 led an effort called M-Crown to re-envision the area with a proposal in 2015 to support housing with requirements for light industrial and community facility space. In 2016, we began engaging with the board, which led to a land use framework in 2018, identifying Atlantic Avenue as a corridor for a higher density mix of uses, areas south of Atlantic for a moderate density mix of uses, and a couple of areas in purple to highlight new housing and increasing job densities. This was followed by the board updating their proposal and more outreach during the pandemic. Building on the community-based planning and demands for a holistic plan as an alternative to private applications, in 2022, elected officials, community boards, and stakeholders submitted a letter requesting a neighborhood plan, which we then agreed to advance and began preparing for outreach. In early 2023, we kicked off engagement with the City Council and WXY as an independent facilitator. From the winter to spring, we held over 20 meetings, 3 community planning workshops, 9 working group meetings on 3 different topic areas, and 9 steering committee meetings, comprised of a smaller group of stakeholders. Key stakeholders in AMUP include the council members, community boards, and steering committee members, along with local block associations, property and business owners, and local nonprofits. And throughout the process, we've engaged with many agencies, especially HPD, DOT, and parks, given the goals around affordable housing and public realm improvements. Following engagement, we released the AMUP Community Vision and Priorities Report, summarizing the public outreach and feedback, which included priorities to create and preserve affordable housing, part of which was driven by concerns around the decline in the Black population in the surrounding area and residents threatened by displacement. And we also heard priorities for a mix of uses with density anchored along Atlantic Avenue and priorities to develop a street-wide plan with new open space or improvements to existing ones and supporting businesses and job training programs while reactivating the Bedford Atlantic Armory. The report also included a new land use framework, reinforcing Atlantic Avenue as a growth corridor, with density stepping down to the south, while expanding the mixed-use areas due to concerns about restricting housing on certain blocks. Later in 2023, we presented a draft zoning proposal followed by a scoping meeting for environmental review. And this year, with agency partners, we held a business roundtable, tenant resource fair, and public realm open house. During this time, the steering committee also continued to meet, and now I'll turn it over to Jesse to discuss the proposal. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Jonah. And so really, oh, wow, this button is sensitive. Okay, so shaped by what we've heard, the draft neighborhood plan is really guided by 3 goals. First, to address a housing shortage and support affordability needs. Foster a mixed-use neighborhood for employment and housing. And third, improve urban design, infrastructure, and public realm. And really informed by these goals, we developed a few strategies that guided our process. Allow opportunities for new mixed-use buildings while with moderate to high density along key corridors while requiring active ground floor uses. With the addition of new residents and jobs, incentivize new public open space and provide well-needed streetscape safety enhancements and design requirements along Atlantic Avenue. Also, in other strategic locations, incentivize job-generating uses with housing above. And so to help achieve these goals and strategies, we can start using the following tools. From changes to the zoning map, creating a special district to go beyond what the underlying zoning can achieve on its own, site-specific opportunities to unlock potential for public sites, and also capital and programmatic opportunities in coordination with our agency partners. And so as mentioned before, to facilitate the proposal, the department is proposing a zoning map amendment, which is highlighted in purple. Establish the special Atlantic Avenue mixed-use district, which is highlighted in the blue hatch. And then also zoning text amendments to apply mandatory inclusionary housing, also at MIH. And so in addition, there are a few site-specific proposals that are highlighted in yellow. This is the designation and approval of Urban Development Action Area projects, which are known as UDAPs, and the acquisition and disposition of city-owned land. I'll be using the next few set of slides to share the proposed zoning map amendment and text amendment for the special district. Starting with the zoning map changes. They're grouped into 5 areas. We have the Atlantic Avenue, North-South Avenues, and mid-block mixed-use sub-areas, which comprise of the primary area you see in the middle there, with the residential area and the Armory sub-area related to specific sites, which will be discussed together with those opportunities later. As I present each area, the following special district proposals will be interspliced throughout. The Special Atlantic Avenue Mixed-Use District would include special rules to ensure a lively pedestrian experience along Atlantic Avenue and other corridors while supporting a mix of residential, commercial, community facility, and light industrial uses. The auto-centric character of this 120-foot wide corridor has resulted in hundreds of traffic-related injuries in the past decade. Atlantic Avenue has narrow sidewalks at varying widths, with minimal trees for shade, no opportunities for rest, and with a mix of uses and users that really divides the neighborhoods to the north and south. Similar to other parts of AMUP, it's a transit-rich area, located near the subway along Fulton Street with the LIRR access at Northern Avenue. And lastly, it has been an area of some of the more recently new constructions facilitated by private rezonings. As one of the only few 100-foot wide streets in Brooklyn along Atlantic Avenue, we seek to promote high-density mix of housing and other types of uses on the ground floor that really enhance the streetscape. Given the long block street frontages along Atlantic Avenue here, we propose requirements of active uses on the ground floor, articulate and break up the facades of new buildings, and set back the street wall of new buildings to strengthen the streetscape and pedestrian experience. And so to achieve this, we're proposing to extend the C63A district along the corridor, as well as mapping one block frontage between Classen and Franklin Avenue as an M14A and R9A, which is to reflect the current and potential future expansion of manufacturing uses related to the GMDC and the MTA. C63A is a commercial district with an R9A equivalent, permitting residential FAR of up to 9.02 and a commercial FAR of up to 6. M14A, which is a manufacturing district that was previously created by ZEO, Zoning for Economic Opportunity, and R9A is a paired district that follows the R9A regulations and allows a commercial and industrial use FAR of up to 5. Both of these districts would also allow community facilities up to 7.5 FAR. For both districts, base heights can be up to 135 feet with a maximum building height of 185 feet or 18 stories. As mentioned earlier, many of the sidewalks along the corridor are only 8 to 17 feet wide with even less clear paths for walking, creating a narrow condition for pedestrians. And so to improve this, the special district would require that the street wall of new buildings to be set back at a maximum of 5 feet with the ultimate goal of achieving a 20-foot wide sidewalk. To help mitigate concerns of potentially undesirable pedestrian experiences of walking along a C63A density, new developments will be required to break up their facade and ensure recesses and articulation. The special district is going to require this for developments with 100 feet of more wide of street frontage. Another tool that can help break up the long street walls is an incentive for providing open space. Relatedly, portions of AMUP are located further from existing parks, and there are limited opportunities for new open space. So in response, we're proposing to create a new CPC authorization for a 20% floor area bonus at a 4-to-1 ratio to provide new publicly accessible open space. This would apply to lots greater than 25,000 square feet within areas proposed as R9A along Atlantic Avenue. These will involve a separate application process and environmental review. And so to recap, along Atlantic Avenue, the special district aims to mitigate pedestrian experience concerns where requiring active ground floors with transparency requirements and lobby width restrictions, setting the street wall back to achieve a wider sidewalk, requirements for facade articulation, while also providing an incentive for open space to help break up the street walls and offer new views and quality open spaces. Moving on to the next area. Grand, Classen, Franklin, and Bedford Avenues are important connectors across Atlantic Avenue and provide local services and amenities. Within AMUP, these streets also have much larger corner lots that offer more flexibility to concentrate floor area due to the higher lot coverage. Along these corridors, we seek to encourage mixed-use developments with a variety of non-residential uses that support job growth, including active ground floor uses and crafting the zoning really to step down from the height and density along Atlantic Avenue. To achieve this vision along Grand and Classen Avenues, we propose to map a pairing of R7D and M13A, also a new manufacturing district from ZEO, then a C45D along Bedford Avenue, which is the red triangle on the top part, which would extend an existing C45D mapped as part of the Bed-Stuy South rezoning back in 2007, while also serving as a transitional height from the higher density along Atlantic Avenue. Both districts would allow up to a maximum FAR of 5.6 and a 4.2 for community facility uses. The M13A R7D would permit commercial and manufacturing uses up to 4 FAR, while C45D allows a commercial use up to 4.2 FAR. Both districts would permit a base height of up to 95 feet and a maximum building height of over 125 feet or 12 stories. In addition, AMUP is proposing to map a C24 commercial overlay along the east and west frontages of Classen between Dean and Bergen Streets. To enhance pedestrian connectivity, the special district will require active non-residential ground floor uses along major corridors that include Atlantic Avenue, Bedford, Grand, and Classen Avenues, as previously mentioned. This will ensure a mixed-use neighborhood to support spaces for jobs and avoid having residential units on the ground floor of these active avenues. On to the third area. The mid-block areas, which are comprised of areas south of Atlantic Avenue between Grand, Classen, and Franklin Avenue, as well as a section of Herkimer Place to the north. As mentioned earlier, these areas tend to have a little bit less foot traffic with a mixture of parking, storage, and warehouse-style buildings. In the mid-blocks, we propose opportunities for a mix of uses at a height and density appropriate for the side street context, while incentivizing the creation of mixed-use developments and a variety of non-residential uses that support job growth. And so to achieve these goals, AMUP proposes to map a pairing of R6A and an M12A district in the mid-block south of Atlantic and a C43A on the northern port at Bedford Place on a portion of a large site proposed to be mapped with other commercial districts. Both districts would allow an FAR of 3.9 for residential uses, while the M12A R6A would allow 3 FAR for non-residential uses. C43A would allow up to 3.4 FAR for commercial and community facility uses, and both districts are going to allow a base height of up to 65 feet, followed by a maximum building height of 95 feet. With R6B and R6A zoning districts to the north and south of the area, these two R6A zoning district equivalent heights will really act as a transitional height from Atlantic Avenue to the surrounding areas. Lastly, to incentivize 1 or 2 floors of spaces for jobs, we are proposing an increase of 1.1 FAR for a total of F5 FAR in mixed-use buildings. Moving on to the orange sliver, that's on the top right portion of the map, which is Herkimer Place. Given the narrow width of the street, and to allow a transition height of Atlantic Avenue and to the existing R6B to the north, AMUP is proposing to map M11A paired with an R6B district, which would allow an up to 2.4 FAR for residential and 2 FAR for non-residential uses. For here, the base heights would rise to 45 feet with a maximum building height of 65 feet or 6 stories. Again, to incentivize spaces for jobs here, we're proposing to increase the FAR to 0.6 for a total of 3 FAR only for mixed-use buildings. And so I'm going to take a second to show actually how that incentive would work. I just talked about in both districts. So in both the M12A, R6A, and M11A, R5B areas, just like any normal paired districts, the districts will allow an all-residential building or a fully non-residential building, right, which are shown on the 2 diagrams on the left. However, if a mixed-use building is developed, then the total FAR could increase to encourage 1 or 2 floors of non-residential space. And in that option, building heights, only in that option, building heights would increase to accommodate that additional 0.6 to 1.1 FAR. In addition to this mixed-use tool incentive, we propose a few more special district tools actually in these paired districts. First is to allow greater flexibility to mix residential with light industrial, only if a restrictive declaration is recorded. This is in coordination with the Department of Environmental Protections, or DEP, to ensure proper ventilation and protections against any other environmental concerns. Second, for large lots with more than 20,000 square feet, with existing loft-style buildings, we're allowing an increase in height to support a mix of uses. Additionally, within the mid-block portions, some lots are adjacent or near elevated rails can be physically constrained. And so to address this issue, the special district is proposing to allow through lots that are adjacent to the elevated Franklin Avenue shuttle to waive rear yard equivalents to allow more flexibility so that they could build in their rear yards and also set back from the train. Also, permitting developments within 100 feet of the shuttle and the LIRR to increase height by 1 or 2 stories for flexibility given any potential constraints related. Moving on to more site-specific zoning. The Bedford Atlantic Armory is a large, city-owned property designated as an LPC landmark and is used by the Department of Homeless Services, or DHS, as a men's shelter, along with storage, laundry, and training facilities. I'll note that under the existing M11 zoning district, the Armory building is actually non-compliant. And so for the Armory, in the short term, we're aiming to bring the building into greater compliance with zoning and provide flexibility for potential renovations. And in the medium or long term, we really want to explore reactivating underutilized space for community-oriented uses while maintaining the DHS shelter operations. And so to help achieve these goals, we're proposing to map an M13A district, which would increase the existing 1 FAR to 4 FAR, while also eliminating off-street parking requirements. Moving on to the last and the residential area. AMUP seeks to maximize affordable housing opportunities on city or non-profitly owned sites. And there is one to the south of the Armory that's actually pictured here, and 2 non-contiguous areas. Under the proposal, the Bergen and Dean Street area in yellow, which is on the left of the map, would be rezoned to R7D, which allows up to 5.6 FAR for residential uses with a base height of 95 feet and a maximum base height of 125 feet. At a non-profitly owned site near Franklin Avenue and Pacific Street, which is the middle shape there, we propose an R7A with a C24 commercial overlay along the Franklin Avenue frontage. R7A would permit up to 5 FAR with a base building height of 85 feet and a maximum building height of 115 feet. Lastly, at the 457 Nostrand Avenue site, which is on the far right, we propose to map an R72 district, which allows up to 4.6 FAR and also building height, base heights of 75 feet and a maximum building height of 135 feet. For new developments, off-street parking is required for 50% of market rate or non-income restricted housing units, which can result in underutilized parking areas and compete for space with housing and other uses. So to reduce conflicts between providing space for parking or housing, improve the ground floor streetscape, and minimize curb cuts and loading along Atlantic Avenue, the special district proposes to waive off-street parking requirements for residential uses. This is also in alignment with the City of Yes for Housing Opportunity. We believe this makes sense, especially in light of AMUP being such a walkable and transit-rich area with lower rates of car ownership. Lastly, with the goal of increasing permanent income-restricted units, MIH options will be mapped to options 1, 2, as well as deep affordability option. Option 1 requires 25% of the residential floor area be set aside for households earning an average of 60% of the area median income, or AMI. Option 2 requires 30% of the residential floor area to be set aside at an average of 80% AMI. Lastly, the deep affordability option requires that 20% of the residential floor area be set aside at 40% AMI. According to the land use application, AMUP would produce approximately 4,600 housing units, including up to 1,055 MIH units on private sites, plus 381 units at 100% affordable sites. This concludes the section of the zoning map changes and text amendments, and now I'm excited to hand the presentation over to a first-time presenter in front of the City Planning Commission, Bianca Bryant.
Thanks, Jesse. Welcome, Bianca.
Thank you so much. so now we are going to go focus on more of the site-based proposals, which will be facilitated by several zoning map changes, UDAP's acquisitions and dispositions. So as Jesse mentioned, in addition to the MIH units, we will also be including proposals that will add even more income-restricted units to the AMUP area. As we mentioned before, there are two HPD sites located within AMUP, situated between Carlton Avenue and 6th Avenue. Both of these sites are located less than a block away from the Bergen Street 2-3 station. And for these projects, HPD led a series of public workshops, meetings, and online questionnaires during the early pandemic with the support of previously elected officials, Community Board 8 and DCP. And both of these sites were part of a Women Minority Business Enterprise Request, or RFP, in 2021. So these are the two sites as they stand today, which are currently used for HPD's housing and inspection units. On the left is 516 Bergen Street, which is improved with the garage, and the right is 542 Dean Street, which is a surface parking lot, which is to the east of the Dean Street playground. On the first site, 542 Dean Street, HPD seeks to develop the Dean Park Edge proposal, which is shown here on the slide. This project proposes 151 affordable units for older New Yorkers, earning up to an AMI of 50%. The proposed building demonstrates well-designed and efficient floor plates through modular architecture, with a subtle shift in the facade wall to allow for a wider sidewalk and better pedestrian flow to both new and existing publicly open space. In addition, the proposal includes on-site social services, a separate community facility space, and 6,500 square feet of new publicly accessible open space that will connect Dean Street southward to Bergen Street. At the second site, 516 Bergen Street, HPD seeks to develop the Bergen Green development proposal shown here in the rendering. The project proposes an 11-story mixed-use building with 111 affordable homes for families, with a majority of units up to 60% AMI and the rest of them up to 80% AMI based on HPD's ELA program. The proposal also includes a 5,000 square foot multi-purpose cultural and arts center, a recreational community center, and 23 replacement parking spaces that will be located in the cellar for HPD to continue housing their inspection vehicles. So to facilitate these proposals, the UDAP action is proposed to allow these sites to develop into 100% income-restricted housing, and an acquisition of city-owned property will be used to enable future HPD parking in the cellar of the Bergen Street new development. The next site is a previously city-owned 19,200 square foot site at 1142 Pacific Street that was disposed of in 1987 to facilitate a rehabilitation project. Prior UDAP and deed restriction states that HPD has approval over changes in the COO, conveyance, and financing, and right now the site is currently sitting vacant. To reactivate the site, HPD has been working with a development team led by Acacia Network, which is a social service provider and affordable housing developer who owns the site currently. Acacia proposes to develop an 11-story mixed-use building with 119 affordable units, along with a ground floor community facility space. To facilitate the proposal, AMUP is including site-specific acquisition and disposition actions in order to allow HPD to reacquire the site and remove the deed restriction, followed by a transfer or a sale to Acacia so they can develop the affordable housing that you see here. In response to community comments that scoping 457 Nostrand Avenue was added to AMUP in order to explore development on this 30,000 square foot property, which is currently owned by DOE. It has an adult learning center on site, as well as a parking lot that is used by the students and the employees. The site is located 1 block away from the Nostrand Avenue AC station and is near the Nostrand Avenue and Fulton Street corridors. We are exploring opportunities with HPD and DOE to develop affordable housing and expand school space on the site as an infill project on the parking lot, while coordinating with LPC since this site is located within a historic district. Preliminary analysis shows that the site could support up to 200 units as well as expansion space for NYC public schools. To facilitate this future development, we are proposing a disposition of city-owned property. At 1110 Atlantic Avenue, there is a 25,720 square foot through lot site owned by the city and leased by the NYC Transit Authority for a cable repair shop and storage. For context, a portion of this site is constrained by the elevated S shuttle. And just so everybody's aware, on the other side of the S shuttle, there's another site owned in fee by the MTA at 1119 Pacific Street, and that's currently used for truck parking for the MTA. These images show the existing conditions of the MTA lot, the site that is being leased by the MTA, showing the office spaces and the cable repair shop. The city is proposing an acquisition and disposition action for the city-owned portion of the site to allow for the future redevelopment. So on top of the new affordable housing, we also want to highlight HPD's efforts to advance the goal of helping preserve affordable housing, as that came up again and again in our community engagement as a top priority. And this is really driven by the goals of preventing displacement and tenant harassment, as well as educating tenants on their rights. AMUP is part of a high priority area for HPD's new signature anti-displacement program, which is called Partners in Preservation, which will commit up to almost $3 million over the next 3 years to fund local nonprofits in central Brooklyn. The program, which is set to launch later this year, will support tenant organizing and education in the area's buildings, especially those which have higher risk of tenant harassment. And the city is also working to partner with local CBOs and electeds to help educate tenants about their rights through training, classes, and resource fairs. In addition, HPD is also dedicating efforts to retain and help stabilize homeowners to support wealth building and increase housing choices for AMUP residents. These strategies include a $10 million investment in one-on-one homeowner engagement called the Homeowner Help Desk, relaunching the Home Fix 2.0 program, which supports low or no interest home repair loans, and offering education through training, classes, resource fairs, and clinics. So in addition to the land use actions, AMUP also includes various city-led programs and investments to support the increase in density and the change in the land uses here. While long-term investments in the public realm and infrastructure are currently being discussed, we wanted to highlight a few of the existing and ongoing investments that the city is currently looking at, some of which are a response to recent outreach and reflect down payment on the city's commitment for a holistic neighborhood plan that is AMUP. So these projects include a variety of area-wide HPD tenant and homeowner programs, which we just discussed, and now we will go over the investment to AMUP streets, parks, and infrastructure. So today, AMUP overlaps with many bicycle lanes, wide streets, and is situated near several parks. However, we want to point out that during the engagement process, community members have repeatedly called for both streetscape and parks improvements in this area to better the pedestrian experience. So in response to outreach calling upon the city to advance both short and long-term safety improvements for Atlantic Avenue, which again came up again and again as a very dangerous corridor for both cyclists and pedestrians alike. Through a partnership with DOT, we are very pleased to announce today at certification a set of street improvement projects, or SIPs, to the neighborhood, which will involve neck downs, crosswalk, and marking refreshings, as well as daylighting. So these are currently the locations where the street improvement projects will advance shortly. You'll notice that a majority of these street safety improvements are targeted along Atlantic Avenue, and we look forward to continuing the conversation with DOT and the related community boards in the coming months to further discuss the future of Atlantic Avenue. All right, open space is also a very high priority in this community, and the city is invested in improving open spaces that will see increased use due to the rezoning. 3 blocks to the east of AMUP, we are investing $24.2 million at St. Andrew's Playground, and this project combines multiple streams of funding, DCPC funding, as well as the Community Parks Initiative funding to complete a very transformative reconstruction of St. Andrew's Playground, which has not seen investment in over a generation. This project was announced in 2023 and will involve the installation of a new synthetic turf field with a running track, renovated playground spaces, new seating and gathering spaces, shade trees, plantings, and green infrastructure, as well as upgrades to basketball and handball courts, the public restroom, and entrances. Moving to Lowry Triangle, this is the only existing park located within the rezoning area, and the community has identified a creation of a unified public space between Lowry Triangle and Underhill Plaza as a top priority. DOT, Parks, and DDC have been collaborating for the last several years to expand and improve Lowry Triangle, and the updated scope will incorporate the plaza on Underhill Avenue, and the design is currently underway. We will learn more about it in 2025, and construction will be slated to start in 2027. So we are currently working with DEP to plan for the future of AMUP, but we would today like to call attention to the DEP's stormwater and sewer infrastructure work that is currently underway in the area. This includes the replacement of sewer and water mains along Atlantic Avenue, Dean Street, and Park Place, as well as 150 green infrastructure assets that have been constructed. These include rain gardens, as well as stormwater detention systems at local parks, schools, and churches. AMUP also represents an important opportunity to align with citywide sustainability initiatives such as Local Law 97 and City of Yes for carbon neutrality. Moreover, we believe a large portion of new development within AMUP would be subject to DEP's Unified Stormwater Rule, which requires buildings to install detention tanks and other measures to capture stormwater on site. Now I will hand it back off to Jonah for the last portion of this presentation, which will be the environmental review and the RER.
Thanks, Bianca. All right, only a few more slides left, I promise. All right. So a draft environmental impact statement, or DEIS, was prepared and analyzed on the following 18 topic areas. At this point, we also want to note that there were two DOE properties, which are included in the DEIS for conservative analysis purposes, but that the redevelopment of these sites are not included in the land use application due to ongoing conversations with city agencies, and would also be subject to follow-up land use actions. A notice of completion of the DEIS was issued on October 11th, just last week, and identified significant adverse impacts with respect to open space, shadows, transportation, historic and cultural resources, and construction. Mitigation measures are identified in the DEIS and will be explored further between the draft and final versions. To completely avoid significant adverse impacts across all categories, the amount of development would have to be so limited that the goals and objectives of the proposed actions would not be achieved. As required by a local law, a racial equity report was completed, showing a low and lower displacement risk in Prospect Heights and Clinton Hill, and an intermediate and higher risk in Crown Heights North and Bed-Stuy. As we said earlier, the mismatch of housing capacity and population growth has exacerbated rise and caused housing costs to rise, forcing residents to compete with each other over available homes, making it particularly challenging for renters living in unregulated or market rate apartments. The racial equity report demonstrates this problem in another way. Over the last 10 years, median household income and median gross rent in the neighborhoods around AMUP have both grown at a faster pace than Brooklyn or the city as a whole, with a median household income of $72,000 for Community District 3, $63,000 for Community District 8, and that's compared to about $68,000 for Brooklyn and $71,000 for the city as a whole. And related to these trends, we've seen significant demographic changes over the past 10 to 15 years. I want to acknowledge that rising housing costs in the surrounding neighborhoods and predatory real estate practices have displaced many residents, affecting Black and lower income residents more than other communities. In the area approximating Community District 8, while the white, Asian, Hispanic, and mixed race populations have all increased from 2010 to 2020, the number of Black residents declined by 20%. In the geography approximating Community District 3, we see a similar trend, where the white and Asian populations increased and the Black population decreased by 24%. In the geography approximating Community District 2, which overlaps for one block in AMUP, we also see this trend, though less pronounced, with a loss of 12% of the Black population. Because the AMUP area doesn't currently allow housing, and there are limited opportunities for new housing in the surrounding area, this is precisely why we are looking to strengthen the preservation of existing affordable housing, help meet Central Brooklyn's housing demand, ensure permanent rent-regulated housing is created, and maximize affordable housing on the remaining public sites. To summarize, in our proposal, we're seeking zoning map amendments, zoning text amendments through MIH, and to establish a special district to support a mixed-use neighborhood and improve the public realm. And finally, site-specific actions to facilitate housing and other uses on 5 separate sites. All of this is driven by a goal to re-envision an industrially zoned area in central Brooklyn to support housing and job growth, coupled with public realm and infrastructure improvements. In total, we project AMUP will create 4,600 new homes, approximately 1,440 of which will be income restricted, and space for 2,800 jobs, while being a catalyst for capital and program-based investments in alignment with CDVS and citywide sustainability programs. And with that, we're thrilled to reach this milestone and happy to take your questions.
Great, thank you. Well, let me be the first to congratulate you and the team on all of your extraordinary efforts to bring us to this date. We know how much work went into this, both in the technical piece of putting it together and also the community engagement piece, which I know is very much appreciated. So thank you and congratulations. I'm going to start with Commissioner Benjamin.
Hi, I just want to thank everybody involved with this project. I went on the tour and I was very impressed with both the work that has been done and the thoughtfulness that is done into this proposal. Of course,
I think everybody heard the first part of it, but in case they didn't, I just wanted to thank all of you for putting together a very thoughtful proposal that included a number of significant players like the council people and the community boards. As you know, this is a changing neighborhood and has been a dividing point between the communities of Crown Heights and Clinton Hill, Bed-Stuy. And I don't think that this plan will necessarily change that for a variety of reasons. But I am somewhat concerned about several things, one of which is the changes in the transportation patterns. We have talked about it on the tour that Atlantic Avenue is one of the main truck thoroughfares between Brooklyn and Long Island. And in some of what you're proposing, it would seem to me you're reducing the carrying capacity of the streets, particularly where you're talking about doing, DOT is talking about doing bump ups or other things that will limit the number of the capacity of the street to carry cars and trucks, and in some locations, potentially the ability to make turns or how they make the turns. So I was hoping you could give me a little more information about that and whether the EIS, the DEIS, incorporates those DOT proposed changes in their analysis of the, I don't know whether they would put the, I don't know whether DOT is planning on doing these changes irrespective of this proposal, in which case they would go in the future no build, or whether they're only going to do them if this proposal goes forward.
Absolutely. No, thank you for that question. Especially, you know, we do recognize Atlantic Avenue, and especially in conversation with Department of Transportation, that this is a major corridor, right, throughout Jamaica and to all the way to Brooklyn. You definitely spoke to it, how important Atlantic Avenue is. And so I think to the first question about related to kind of some of the improvements that we just mentioned today, really focused on the street improvements, which was kind of looked at like refreshing some markings, some neck downs, and like really like bulb outs that are happening.
Daylighting.
Yeah, and daylighting, absolutely.
Which reduces capacity.
Which could help, which could affect the turning radius that you're in, capacity.
And the capacity.
Yeah. And so definitely we've recognized this, and we've talked to the Department of Transportation about this, and they've definitely commented and reviewed a lot of the mitigation efforts that might be identified in the EIS for like turn radiuses, and I think there were a few that may have been called out, and there are plans to kind of coordinate where the safety improvements or the street improvements are going to happen, where they won't impact any of the turn radiuses and that. But each intersection is being looked at specifically between. With the proposals in mind that DOT has, or without them? I guess my question, when you're looking at the EIS, what you're measuring from basically is the future no build to the build. Yes. So if they're going to do them anyway, and they've put these measures in the future no build, then clearly it's not going to have an impact. So I think, yeah, the safety improvement projects that are kind of were announced today, those are definitely in coordination with the future build in consideration as well. Yes.
We have.
Hi, Stephanie Schlew, Director of Environmental. So because they're still in conceptual phases of the specific improvements that will be made throughout the area, those specific measures are not incorporated into the no build or the build because they haven't been exactly defined. So without knowing, the exact parameters of the different improvements, it wasn't, incorporated, technically into the quantitative analysis.
So will they be the subject of their own environmental review by DOT?
Yeah, DOT would need to study them in coordination with the design and evaluation of those measures.
And do we have a time frame on that? When will we come to know during this process, if we will, whether those changes are going to happen and where they would happen?
I'll just say for the FEIS, we'll take this back and see if there's a need for any changes. But one of the top priorities we heard was a long-term redesign of Atlantic Avenue. And in our early conversations with DOT, that would occur after AMUP and involve its own robust traffic study that includes analyzing different scenarios. So I think I would frame it as our EIS is, one component, but we're also working with DOT on like a larger set of improvements, and that would come with its own study.
But how would that then affect some of the proposals within AMUP, which aim to increase the sidewalk size?
So just to clarify, what we're showing today are safety improvement projects, which are known as paint and plastic. They're temporary measures that are in order to create these conditions around neck downs and other pedestrian improvements. So what we're showing today are DOT interim conditions. As mentioned before, larger actual redesign, which has been a request of the community, would be something that would have to be analyzed as a follow-up after this initiative.
To the point about the street wall widening or sidewalk widening. Yes. Currently, the zoning, we're only proposing to set the building back, and that's like the physical part, right? Like so, any new developments that are going to come along Atlantic Avenue will have to set their building back to achieve the sidewalk widening. The zoning isn't proposing any sidewalk widening into the roadbed. Only into.
And so we're maintaining at all places 100-foot roadbed?
120, actually, yeah.
We are.
Mm-hmm, yes.
And anything that would reduce that would be part of DOT's
long-term analysis that Stephanie and Jonah and Alex just mentioned, yes.
Okay. Thank you. I really appreciate that. It's a very important street. And I know that the community is not always in love with the fact that they have basically a throughway going through the middle, but there is no place else that trucks can really access. And I had thought it was arterial in the zoning resolution, but it's not. So, but it does function like one. So I think we really need to be very careful of any attempts to reduce the capacity or the ability of goods to be transported throughout the city. And my second question is about Lefferts Place in particular. Since Lefferts Place backs on north side of Atlantic Avenue.
Maybe I'll go to the Atlantic Avenue zoning map. Go down a bit. Oh, no. Okay.
The C6 portion.
Yes.
That area of Lefferts is predominated by 3-story buildings with 30-foot rear yards. There's a couple of others, but many of them are on the north side of Lefferts. So how, given the reduction if City of Yes is adopted by the City Council, the rear yard required for this C6 will just be 20 feet. Mm-hmm. And there could be a 18-story building. is there anything we can do to give those homeowners some relief from a looming 18-story building over them?
Yes, I know. It's the one block we're talking about between, oh, I don't have a laser, but the block between where, what is that, the Classen Avenue,
yes,
moving east between Franklin, yeah. I know for currently the lots are actually, these lot depths, right, for the C63 are actually large, like deeper than normal. So ideally, yes, if City of Yes, the rear yard reduction, right, maximum is down 30 to 20, that could technically apply here, right, if that goes through as is. But hopefully, ideally, these lots are larger than 100 feet, right? And so ideally, typical, floor plate depths, ideally they wouldn't get too wide, right? And they'll probably be still centered in front towards Atlantic Avenue. But in terms of additional, I think that's something we can think about and how to.
I would really like you to, particularly because it is just in those places where if we wanted to expand the depth of the sidewalk, it could reasonably be done without affecting the building form, but it would be detrimental to the people on Lefferts how much they chose to do this, or whether they chose to use it. We could make it worse by using the open space option that would allow them to get additional FAR even closer to the backyards and to the houses that are on Lefferts. So I would really like you to take a look at that.
I'll just quickly note that we will take a look at that, and the concerns that you raise are also concerns that we've heard from the community members as well.
Thank you. I have my questions here, and I don't have any idea of what I meant when I wrote this. It says, if maybe you can help me out, no parking in City of Yes, 125. Anybody? You take these notes while you're doing it, and then, yeah, thank you.
Okay, Commissioner, thank you. Let me go to Commissioner Cerullo.
Thank you for the presentation and for all the work. First, I just want to note that the video actually moved. I like that the people and the dog was moving across the street. I had to recognize that as opposed to the fixed artwork. Couple of quick things, somewhat little, perhaps less random than that comment, but a little random. In the history portion of the presentation at the start, it referenced the Long Island Railroad and the Long Island Railroad ultimately going below grade. Are there any subsurface conditions in this area that create any concern about actually developing or redeveloping this area, or that might trigger the need and relationship with the MTA, and that might actually create a cost that makes a plan like this not as feasible?
Yeah, so first, that's an excellent question. Let me say first that from our work in Gowanus and Park Slope along 4th Avenue, and then in East New York, further east along Atlantic Avenue, we've learned many lessons, first of which the MTA does have a process where they review permits for any portions adjacent to their infrastructure for engineering or other types of needs that have to be met. We also learned from East New York, which has the LIR running below grade and where we promoted growth along both sides of the corridor, that generally development is able to coexist side by side. There's enough clearance between the LIR and the property lines. That being said, one of the limitations we learned related to improvements along the the street itself. So for example, some trees are permitted, but not others.
Yeah.
If you have a landscape median, it has to be designed in a certain way that it doesn't,
I understand.
And we did this in coordination with DOT. It was an early question that we had, and the agencies kind of assured us that, it doesn't affect our vision and the ability for development to pencil out.
Okay, I appreciate that. That was a follow-up question about some of the amenities, the streetscape amenities, and the impact that the subsurface conditions may have on being able to actually bring them to fruition in the community itself. So I appreciate that. A couple quick questions. When you talked about the 20% bonus for public space, that was linked to also a sort of a reality that this is an area where it's unlikely that new public space would be built without it. And obviously not knowing all of the details of what we're requiring in the development, but has there been consideration of actually sort of finding the balance between requiring the construction of of public space while perhaps providing a bonus for going beyond that versus just leaving the option to a bonus, which obviously I have no issue with, but is there a mechanism by which we could actually require the creation of public space that we drive in terms of the vision of the sort of development plan?
Sure. So I'm going to start, and I'm sure others will jump in. I'll say generally for commercial districts where we layer on a bonus either through a special district or other mechanism, that's typically voluntary, so bonus-based. The exception to that is along the waterfront, where through, I think the legal standard is through like the public trust doctrine. Not just the city, but I think state and even at a federal level, there are ways that we can require accessible public open space if certain criteria are met. I think for AMUP, we're trying to strike a balance where we want to promote new open space. We also want to look at opportunities to improve existing open spaces, given the lack of options on public land. But that's kind of the two. I would say the WPA, or waterfront public access areas along the waterfront, that's I wouldn't say exception, but the example where we do require it. But we can check this internally, but my understanding is for higher density areas where we have like POPs or other, those are incentive based.
And I'll just add, we are looking at the potential for additional open space on some of the public sites, if that's possible. And so where we do have control, we're also looking at opportunities there.
Okay. I mean, I just think that would be a important sort of review and possibility. But again, it's just a thought at this point in the process. And lastly, it seems to me that in all of the examples, and I could be wrong, this is all about development of rental units. Is there any part of this that might embrace home ownership opportunities for people where appropriate? Because I know just citywide, and we see so many of these projects that we're approving, it's primarily, if not almost exclusively, rental. And is there an opportunity here where it might work with HPD and the subsidy for opportunities for home ownership for people?
Yeah, so great
question, Commissioner Cerullo, I'm Sarit Plotkin, Director of Neighborhood Planning at HPD. And, I think a couple things to keep in mind that when we think about affordable home ownership, we're thinking about, really three ways that we can expand affordable home ownership opportunities. It's a mix of increasing access, retaining and stabilizing, and also creating new homes. So I think you're talking a little bit more about creating new homes, but I think the other two are important for us to be talking about as well. So increasing access, I think that is really about, down payment assistance, and that's something that HPD has recently reinvigorated with our Home First program that offers forgivable loans up to $100,000 for first-time homeowners, and it's recently relaunched, and we're expecting to reach 3 times as many homeowners. And then when it comes to really retaining and stabilizing, I think you heard a little bit earlier that we are specifically for this plan looking to bring stronger home ownership education resources here, and our primary program, or really kind of signature program for that, is the Homeowner Help Desk, which focuses on one-on-one support for homeowners, focused on financial counseling, legal counseling. It's really a one-stop shop for homeowners. Things like foreclosure, tax liens, deed theft, all things that we know are issues specifically here. That's a partnership with the Center for New York City Neighborhoods, and we'll also be partnering with local community-based organizations in this specific part of Brooklyn. And that's something that we'll be launching later this fall, so you'll hear more about it soon. But that is one way that we are specifically looking to educate and reach homeowners in this area to ensure that they can not be displaced and maintain their homes. And then kind of the third piece, the create piece, HPD does have a program, a term sheet called Open Door, that builds homes for moderate income homeowners. So that is kind of a bit of a higher income range. And that's something that, given the higher income range, it has been harder to implement. We have a few projects of that a year that advance. And so that's definitely something that could be implemented here, but it's not something that we have specific programs for right now, or something that would happen on a mass scale. Does that make sense?
Yes, and I appreciate that, and sort of the categories of which home ownership is focused. I guess if what's not clear to me is whether there's the potential, this isn't going to happen overnight, and whether or not there potentially are options, and again, home ownership I see even in sort of apartment, mid-rise, high-rise buildings, not just a home with a side yard and backyard kind of home ownership. Obviously, where I'm going with this is I think at some point these applications should be providing the option, or at least if there is the opportunity, even in the future, if the perfect program doesn't exist today, that as construction occurs and the development of units occurs, that there's an opportunity for one or more of these developments to provide an underlying opportunity for people to actually feel the privilege of home ownership somewhere. And it's not just always about rental, that somewhere there's a balance, even though I know rental will always drive our residential population. But when we're starting from scratch, I think there's an opportunity we shouldn't let go by, even if the perfect program doesn't necessarily exist today, because this is a years-long development plan.
Sure.
So that was just both a question and a comment, but.
Appreciate that. And, we're always thinking about ways to support wealth building for New Yorkers, and specifically in this area. So we'll keep thinking about it.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Commissioner. Yep. Let me go to Vice Chair Knuckles.
Thank you. Could we go to the draft EIS? Page? Okay. Yeah, I don't see anything about schools. So is that because the schools are under capacity, or you don't think this will necessarily impact school population, or what?
So it's the former, that the schools are under capacity, and so there is adequate capacity to allow all of the students that are generated through the proposal to have seats in the public schools. Trying to get to the area, but all subdistricts 1, 2, and 3 of Community School District 13 and Subdistrict 1 of 17 are all under capacity for elementary, middle, and high schools.
And approximately how many students do you with 4,600 units of housing, approximately yield?
I'm not able to locate the number.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll follow up and get back to you.
Okay. And the 2,800 jobs, do you see those principally as service jobs coming out of the retail portion, or where would those jobs emerge? From where?
So it's based on a mix of the uses we assumed in our development scenarios, which we can get back to you on the specifics, but it's a mix of retail, office, community facility, and some light industrial jobs. So mainly a mix, but I would say leaning more on office and retail based, partly because of the needing to have a more conservative assumption for our environmental, and for a lot of the uses along the corridors, we expect a concentration of retail along some of them. So, but we can get back to you on this.
Thank you.
And just to follow up, I did locate the numbers on that. So there's 447 elementary and middle school students combined and 257 high school students. So the multipliers of how many students are generated per unit is relatively small in this area, just given the demographic shifts.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice Chairman. Commissioner Osorio?
Thank you, Chair. Thanks so much for the presentation, for addressing our questions, and for the tour. I also found it really useful. My questions are also about environmental review, but first I just wanted to say that I'm really pleased with some of the proposals under discussion, specifically the ideas to enliven the pedestrian experience and, considering ways to address some of the issues that the current development presenting is really timely, really relevant, and very thoughtful. The questions I have today are really about environmental review, and so maybe, Stephanie, this may be for you, but building on what my colleagues have said, so starting with Commissioner Cerullo's question about open space, because the draft EIS has identified, that not only we're below the city's capacity in terms of guidelines of open space per 1,000 residents, but that the with action scenario is actually going to result in a significant decrease of 6.29%. Mm-hmm. I get the response to Commissioner Cerullo's question in terms of okay, so we're going to improve open space here, and here. We're going to create this incentive, but aren't we required to increase open space given the fact that the with action is going to have a significant impact?
So the environmental review is required to identify practicable and feasible mitigation strategies that can run the gamut from things that are creating brand new open spaces to improving existing to, even the actions that are creating the possibility for new open space to be created on private sites in the future. So it's kind of that mixed method approach to identifying successful mitigation strategies. So those are roughly outlined in the draft, and we're hoping to have more robust discussion for the final.
What I read was that, again, the document lists the possibilities, but other than saying that you're evaluating them and sort of like the things that we heard today in terms of where you think, where they're actually important investment commitments, budgetary sort of like line items, I just feel that this is a community where the city owes sort of like to develop that. So my question is, I understand your response. Thank you. You're clarifying what the study legally sort of like, establishes. But I'm just saying that this is one of those places where we owe that
Yeah, definitely understood the limits of environmental review where we're required to disclose the potential for these impacts and the possibility for unmitigated impacts where full mitigation strategies are not able to be identified. But certainly there's, a gap between what the environmental review requires and what the plan will ultimately deliver.
Thank you. That's useful. It's just that 6.29 reduction is a big number.
Yeah.
Cool. The other question has to do with displacement. So the document lists a potential direct displacement of 20 residents, 319 employees, and 64 firms. And so I understand sort of like that, actually the very significant sort of like ideas here. One, and I want to have questions about two of them. One is with the MX rezoning. I appreciate the use of the mixed district here, but sort of like leaving the scenario open for it to either be residential, either be commercial, and maybe be mixed. I think we're leaving a lot of sort of like gray space here for what we know is a potential displacement of industrial businesses. In your response to Commissioner to Vice Chair Knuckles, you said like, well, we actually already think that it's going to be more commercial than industrial, and so I'm concerned with that. Sort of like, shouldn't we, if we're rezoning to MX, shouldn't we be requiring mixed use, and other than just hoping for the best there?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and I would say that it's an issue that we've been working on for many years, especially given Community Board 8's goals around light industrial and community facility space. I'm going to answer this in two parts, but I think we can certainly take it back. We understand it's a priority. First, broadly speaking, we're trying to do a number of things, both in zoning and non-zoning, to promote jobs.
Mm-hmm.
And so part of that is looking at tools to require incentivize space for job growth, like along the corridors and the mid-blocks, but then also pursuing non-zoning strategies, like opportunities at the Bedford Atlantic Armory, a major city asset that could have space and achieve some of those goals. And on top of that, we're also working with SBS, EDC, other agency partners to see gaps in services and programs that kind of promote, serve businesses, but also promote job training, so both on the workforce economic development side. With respect to the numbers within the EIS, I would say that that's actually something we want to take a closer look at, because even since that analysis is done, there have been some changes, and we want to make sure that the numbers are accurately reflecting the jobs there. Within AIM-UP, though, we do want to note that of the 700 jobs, only about 30 are in manufacturing, and a lot of those jobs are concentrated at the Greenpoint Manufacturing Design Center, GMDC, which owns their space, and we've been working with and are generally comfortable with rezoning. So I would say, to answer your question, is like we want to be targeted and want to bring all the tools that we have, both zoning and non-zoning. But then we also want to give an accurate picture of this area where it's not as active in terms of industrial use as other IBZs. There are a lot of vacant parking spaces, but we do want to see what we can to support businesses there.
Thank you. I appreciate everything you said. You were...
Sorry, I just want to add one more thing. So as Jonah mentioned, aside from the zoning tools, we mentioned earlier, we are looking at the Armory as a potential. It's one of the reasons why we're rezoning it to an M use, to allow for greater flexibility. Obviously, that's a very, very complicated process with existing uses, but it's something that we heard loud and clear from the community outreach process. And we think, unlike private sites where we have less control over tenancy and business rates and things like that, leases, a public site like that does provide an opportunity to do more creative thinking around types of uses.
Thank you both for that. I appreciate your response in terms of, the limitations on the private sides, as well as activating that property for workforce development. I think that this is and also I appreciate the fact that GMDC is not only sort of like a partner, that you list in your slideshow, but, or somebody that you've been working with closely. The reason why I say that is because I wonder how, our goal here shouldn't just be to protect, but to attract more industrial development here, and there's no one better than GMDC to sort of like think about that. So, as you were and I also appreciate your response about sort of like the zoning and the non-zoning sort of like elements of the toolkit. I was specifically excited with the HPD anti-displacement program, but it sounded like that's for residents. So I'm going to rest assured that the residents are taken care of. Does that program include anything for industrial businesses? Is there anything that, we can discuss in terms of, what are the non-zoning tools in addition to the Armory, which we just discussed, on those important efforts to actually work with the businesses, retain them, grow industrial development here?
Yeah, HPD can correct me, but I believe those are strictly for residents. Let us get back to you, because we definitely have lessons from Gowanus and other areas.
Thank you. Sounds good. Can I ask one last question? Thank you. So this question is for HPD, actually. So thank you so much and for the information shared today and at the tour. HPD?
They're coming.
Oh, they're coming.
Yes.
Thank you so much. No, thank you very much for all the information shared today and at the tour. I guess the quick question that I just want clarification on, clearly all of the developments are 100% affordable. You're working with NMIH, but in terms of the sustainability standards, what are the actual standards, energy efficiency standards that we are sort of like aiming or planning for? And also I appreciate in your slide sort of like the reference to City of Yes for carbon neutrality. It wasn't just clear to me whether we're talking about passive house, whether we're talking about net zero. What are the actual standards then?
Sure. Hello, good afternoon, Commissioner. I'm Alina Frisch, the Director of Brooklyn Planning at HPD. So for both the Dean and Bergen sites, they will be designing to passive house standards. There are proposals for solar roof as well as some green roof as well as meeting and exceeding the Enterprise Green Community standards and Energy Star multifamily new construction program. So they're going beyond even some of the HPD design guidelines for sustainability. So we're happy to continue to work with them as we finalize design.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And then just a quick follow-up for the department. In terms of the opportunities to actually get carbon neutrality incentives on the ground, how are you doing that? What can we expect? What's realistic in that regard for the private sort of like applications that we're hoping to affect?
Do you mean with respect to
carbon neutrality?
Carbon neutrality?
Yeah.
Let us get back to you, because I think it's a combination of what we're doing in terms of speaking with private developers and making sure that we're publicizing information. But also I want to maybe also check with DOB and understanding what's happening on the ground for like as of right permitting. So it's a good, fair question.
This is great. The reason why I'm asking this is I think this is the right moment to think about it in the context of the open space and other environmental improvements, incentives that you're thinking through right now.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Mudding.
Thank you, Chair. I want to just go back for a second to the question of homeownership, because Commissioner Cirillo brings up a good point, and I think I heard from HPD is that you're looking to utilize the open door term sheet for a higher income of individuals, if I'm not mistaken. I think that's what I heard you say, Sarit.
So the program is specifically designed for moderate income homeowners. That's not something that is new or something that we're changing. It's specifically designed for moderate income, so 80 to 130% AMI, or 112,000 for a family of three, up to 182,000 for a family of three.
Thank you for that, and that's perfect, because that's the question I was going to ask. And how does HPD feel about homeownership? And I know this may be going off topic for a second, but it does relate to the fact that there are some HPD sites out there already planned for, I get it, about, homeownership, as Commissioner Cirillo mentioned, does come in various forms. And one form I know that is advantageous is in cooperative, because cooperatives can be placed on a community land trust, whereas condos and cannot, and fee simple homes can. We're not doing fee simple homes. We know that. What is HPD's take on providing cooperatives, utilizing the open door term sheet, and possibly placing those on CLTs within the framework of this AIM-UP. Is there any way of identifying sites that may be possible to fit into an open door term sheet and a CLT scenario, or maybe not a CLT scenario? I'm not too sure what HPD's feel is on the CLT and homeownership.
Yeah, so I can definitely give you a little more information about that, and we can follow up with more information if you have more questions. But HPD does specifically work with CLTs. We have used the Open Door program in collaboration with CLTs. We have an example of this currently in the Bronx right now around Jerome Avenue. And so there are precedents for this, and I think this is something, you know, if the right opportunity presents itself in the AIM-UP area, we would be open to pursuing that here if the right group, the right opportunity presents itself.
Yeah, I think it is critical because, you know, as Commissioner Cirillo said, waiting for it to just evolve later means just waiting for it to happen. And I have seen throughout my history of developing homes throughout the city of New York with the New York City Housing Partnership and Habitat for Humanity, you know, the homeownership stabilizes communities. And it's something that I think we're missing the mark on a bit in terms of balancing the rental and homeownership opportunities that we provide to New Yorkers. So I just wanted to stress that because I really think it's important. It's the only question I have for HPD, quite honestly. I do have some other questions that I believe are for the department. And I propose them as well to the Executive Director, Edith Suchen. My overall question is, when we identify that there are 8,400 individuals, and I'm making the number up for a second, that are without homes, that are looking for homes, are those individuals or those 8,400 comprising of average of family of 4? What exactly are those 8,400 individuals? And if you don't know, I don't expect an answer right now. And the reason why I ask the question is because we're saying we're short. We have a 1.4% vacancy rate, and we have 8,400 individuals that need homes, but it's not really 8,400 individuals if you're averaging out a family of 4. So I'd like to tie those two numbers together a little bit better and understand what that number is, because right now I don't think we're equating it equally by saying 8,400 individuals and it's a 1.4% vacancy rate and we have 10,000 units out there. So if someone could hone down on that number, provide it at a later date, I would appreciate that.
We can certainly, Commissioner. Just a clarification: are you referring to the total number of new housing units, 4,600?
Well, see, that's my point. You're saying that there's the ability to create an X number amount of housing units, but not each housing unit varies between studio and 3 bedrooms. Let's call it for a minute. And each household size varies, right? HPD uses an average of 4 when they're doing their AMIs. So is the 600 units available, 600 families and 2,400 individuals? What is that number? That's what I'm trying to identify here. And I don't believe that we've ever been really clear on what that number is.
We can get back to you. I will say that in the racial equity report, we do have a breakdown of studio 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms, which incorporates HPD's projects where we have that. That's more defined because of the status of those proposals. For the 4,600 number, that's based on the with action scenario in our EIS, and we typically use an average to calculate the total number of people, but that's driven by environmental review, like wanting to ensure a reasonable but conservative amount. But let us get back to you.
No, absolutely. I didn't expect you to have an answer right now, and I'd like to correlate those numbers a little bit better than to say there's 8,400 individuals that. And I'm picking on a number. I'm not specifically picking on a number here, but we're saying that 8,400 individuals aren't housed. But what is that comprised in terms of families, and how many apartments do we really need for those 8,400 individuals is what I'm trying to get at.
Got it. Okay.
All right. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Mann.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, team, for hanging in there for these questions and for the years of work I know it's taken to get here. A few questions. I know one of the challenges of all of these projects is always the interagency collaboration. It's great to see, obviously, HPD at the table here. I think on the DOT piece, to Commissioner Benjamin's questions, I do think it be really, really helpful for them to be a part of our public hearing. I know this is many months away, but I do think the success of this project in no small part rests on DOT's work to actually make this a functioning street network. I know in East New York, early on, the capital projects were included as part of that rezoning. On 4th Avenue in Brooklyn, there was a sort of after-the-fact effort at DOT to kind of retrofit the street network to make the development make sense. It'd be nice if we can try to bring those things together here a bit more coherently as part of this planning effort. So we would appreciate that effort. On the sort of same theme of interagency coordination, I heard that DOE has got a couple of sites that are included in the EIS as part of their housing, or reasonable worst-case development scenario, but I didn't see them as part of the UDAP actions. So it sounds like there's some ongoing policy discussion there about whether they're unlocked for housing or not. Would just, again, I know this is outside of the department's control, but would just emphasize hopefully DOD's productive engagement in unlocking those sites. I'm sure that'll be important for the community and other council stakeholders. And I think it'd be great if there's a way to include the UDAP actions as part of this as an A text or an A application, so we don't have to do another 8-month process to unlock affordable housing, because I don't think that really achieves anything for anybody. So just want the department and, City Hall and others to give that some serious thought. Just as a footnote, I worked on the Bergen Street project probably 7-8 years ago. It's taken a long, long time to get here. And so just want to try to find a way to shorten these project timelines where possible. So those are more, I guess, comments and questions, so you should feel free to jump in. The question on Atlantic Yards was, probably the most key development site here is one we're not talking about, which is the Vanderbilt Atlantic corner, which is a huge, huge, huge development site. So I was just curious what the ESD discussions have been about unlocking that. That's obviously a bit of a disaster from a streetscape standpoint, and also a missed opportunity to do affordable housing, and also a bit of a broken promise. And so I know this is not the department's responsibility, but I am kind of curious what conversations you all have had with ESD about that site.
So I'll start, and I'll just mention that I do want to highlight that 457 Nostrand, one of the DOE sites, we do have a disposition action for. So I just wanted to make it clear that we are advancing disposition actions for that site. So wanted you to be aware of that.
Right, but the other two not, is that right?
That's true. The other two we don't have disposition actions for right now, but they could advance with follow-up actions. Yeah.
Right, and I guess what I'm asking just pointedly then is whether they could be a part of a application as part of this proposal to try to facilitate rather than a follow-up action, which is, we all know it will add another year to that development timeline.
We'll consider that. I think the other question was for you.
Yeah, so on ESD, we have been coordinating with them. We've been checking in, say, every few months just on the status of Pacific Park, Atlantic Yards. With respect to that particular site and the future build-out, as part of our environmental review, we wanted to ensure that we're capturing the full scope of the project. So that I would say on that front, those projects are part of our background growth for the EIS. But I think as part of a redesign of Atlantic Avenue, if that's considered in the future for in coordination with DOT, that wouldn't just necessarily be done for the borders of AMUP. I think we're thinking more broadly and considering Pacific Park. So on the public realm side, that's an important consideration, and as well for just broad infrastructure needs with other agencies.
Understood. I guess, is there an update that you can offer publicly? And then, again, I don't want to tread on anything too sensitive about the status of the development site.
We have a slide in our appendix just on the latest status of ESD, but with respect to the future, we, as far as I think last a week or so ago when we checked in with ESD, they didn't have any updates on like amending the GPP or I think they're still grappling with larger financial issues for those sites.
Okay, and just one other question, I think, well, actually just two questions if you can bear with me. On the sort of mixed use character question, I'm sure we'll get a lot of feedback from the community board if the same characters are involved as used to be involved in this, but it seems like we've got a template in the Gowanus mix, right, where we've got a little more fine-tuned sort of non-pure commercial zoning that could be applied here. So again, and it's maybe not so much a question, but a statement in the form of a question, just whether that's been thought about as a potential sort of mixed-use framework here for the non-residential space.
I know I don't want to hog up too much time, but I would say it was a consideration. I would say at the moment, we have deep concerns about over-prescribing uses, and I think I would say in Gowanus, it was a bit more of a unique case because there were a lot of artists, a higher concentration of businesses there. And so the rationale that we used in Gowanus was based more on preserving the neighborhood character, whereas here, I think we're interested more in kind of non-zoning tools, which we think are would possibly be more effective in achieving those goals. So I would say it's something we considered, but I think we have a lot of concerns about what that'll do in terms of inhibiting development in the future.
Okay. And then just last question, just to piggyback on one of Commissioner Cirillo's questions. I do think one of the challenges along like 4th Avenue, for example, just from in Brooklyn on the streetscape side is the street trees didn't work as well as they could have. And I think in some ways it's as important, if not more, than the ground floor in terms of making something feel like a street you want to walk down as opposed to a street you want to avoid. And so I do think it's worth making sure that Parks believes that they can actually do street tree planting here, because I think otherwise you'll end up with a canyon is a little bit dramatic, but, a fairly significant street wall with maybe mediocre retail because there's not the foot traffic to support it. And I'm not sure that's really a great condition. So I do think that the ability to do street trees and find a way to soften, to some extent, the landscape is pretty critical to that street working. And so I think it's worth a little, maybe if you have already, but worth some drilling down with DPR to see whether they can actually do street trees here.
Yeah, we've definitely been in constant communication with our sister agencies like DOT and Parks Department of, where like one, currently underlying zoning mandates, certain street, new street trees if a new development comes, but also working with Parks Department to figure out, where else we could probably try to ensure trees. I think your question about DOT as well, we've been working with them as well, and we've already worked with them to figure out how we can coordinate when we go to community boards so that, we have DOT as well to address some of these questions.
Yeah, no, I think just my DOT point is more that I think there's a level of ambition here around the streetscape that I think would be nice to see turned up a bit, as much as we all love paint and plastic street fixtures. But this is, one of the most important streets in Brooklyn, if not New York City, and the kind of paint and plastics approach to thinking about streetscape when we're adding 8,000 new people in a neighborhood that's, got a stadium there and is adjacent to a whole bunch of critical neighborhoods, feels a little thin. Again, this is not a criticism of the department, but just a little bit of, I think, an ambition missing here, given the street we're talking about. So I'd like to beat them up a little bit at the public hearing. If we can invite them there. Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Let me go to Commissioner Gold.
Can't tip your hand too much ahead of it. Just really wanted to follow up on one point that Commissioner Osorio was hitting on a little bit. But basically, when we think about the commercial and industrial, the businesses that are there now, right, the most displacement potentially from the DEIS we'll see at this point is on the business side. And I was curious as we think about this, and the walkthrough was super helpful. I mean, you see all sorts, you see industrial, you see commercial, you see auto-related. Is there a natural place, either inside the borders or nearby, where we could conceptually see these businesses, sort of aggregating or having somewhere to go?
So I would say first, in our original framework from 2018, we did carve out a non-residential only area, and that was an early attempt to think of ways of maybe we can concentrate those businesses there. I think when we did our outreach in the past couple of years, we really heard loud and clear there was a overwhelming support for a more like uniform mixed use approach. I would say maybe let us get back to you. It's a really good question. Elsewhere to the east along Atlantic, there are other pockets of M11C8 districts where there are we do see concentrations of like auto repair, gas stations, light industrial. But I think to answer this, it requires not just a look at AMUP, but kind of at the broader area. So let us get back.
And I think it's a fair answer. It's just we certainly don't want to, like, when you think about mixed use, you know, presumably, I don't think I could say for sure, I've never seen a mixed use building that had, you know, I don't know, a car wash, let's say, on the first floor. And that's not to say that a car wash is, you know, all of a sudden what everyone needs in their mixed use spot. But as we walked it, we saw all sorts of uses that, you know, maybe wouldn't lend themselves there. So if there is somewhere, you know, nearby, that would maybe be, you know, we want to take all sides into account, I think. So that's a good answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Okay, let me go back to Commissioner Benjamin.
I figured out what I was aiming to ask, and it goes back to the racial equity report. The racial equity report clearly shows, and you highlighted, that Black people are moving out of this neighborhood. So I'm curious why this wasn't highlighted as a displacement risk, that this zoning could create more displacement of the Black people and Black families that are located here. Additionally, and why it's so important, is because the racial equity report says that the median rent paid by Black people is $1,090, and the median rent paid by white renters in this is $2,909, or $1,900 more. So there's definitely, unless all of the remaining Black people are rent regulated, there's definitely an incentive that this displacement would continue. So I'm just curious why we don't highlight. I know that we only, well, I'm not sure how we decide what displacement. I get that you're not going to do displacement based on one particular racial or ethnic category, but isn't that something that we should be cognizant of in the rezoning, that this may have disparate effects on disparate groups within the rezoned area, and that for some of them that may be negative completely when combined with the fact that the local preference for HPD and assisted housing has gone from 50% to 20%, so that those people may not be accommodated within the HPD created housing.
Yeah, so really appreciate this question, and, you know, want to just first off say that we fully recognize that past displacement has occurred here, full stop. That has been, you know, we see that in the numbers. That's been core to our planning process. As Jonah mentioned earlier, or I think Bianca mentioned earlier, we did a workshop just focused on preservation, where we spoke to local residents about what their priorities are for, you know, tenants' rights, where the gaps are, how we can improve. And it was, you know, those conversations that really drove us making sure that we are implementing the Partners in Preservation program, that we're tailoring that program to this area, which we talked about earlier, but essentially that's, you know, funding, $3 million of funding for local CBOs to ensure that, you know, they have resources to help support tenant organizing, build, and educate around tenant protections. I think in addition to that, want to also highlight or just take a step back and recognize that there are multiple factors that led to the displacement, and there are also multiple tools that we need to combat it going forward. And with those many factors, one of them, of course, is just the lack of available housing, really limiting housing choice for residents in this area. You know, we have the lowest housing vacancy rate, 1%, lowest since the 1960s. And that, you know, low vacancy means more power for landlords, less power for tenants.
Right, except that white people are moving in because their numbers have gone way up.
Yeah. So fully recognizing that, I think what we're trying to do is really take a dual approach here, where we are both building new income-restricted housing. So that's obviously a core part of this, is new affordable, permanently affordable income-restricted housing, of which you have heard there are going to be 1,400 units of, but that's combined with the stronger tenant protections. And we see those two pieces as kind of necessary in tandem. And, to your point, I think it's true. I think there is a recognition that there likely could be I think there could be disparate impacts. We see already that, I think you pointed out that the Black population has lower median income. Like, we see that through the Racial Equity Report, through the Equitable Development Data Explorer. I think when we look at the data that we see in the Displacement Risk Index, I think it's important to keep in mind that there are 3 factors that constitute displacement risk as our displacement risk defines it. So one is population vulnerability, of which there is higher population vulnerability in these areas than in, Crown Heights, Bed-Stuy, than surrounding areas, because there is a higher non-white renter population. It's predominantly non-white renter. And we also see stronger market pressures, hence the market conditions also being a factor with, rents that are increasing. I think the third factor here, the housing conditions, should not be discounted. So housing conditions has to do with rent stabilization. And so we do see, a fairly, or like a stable enough housing stock. That is why you see, when you look at this cluster over here, we're not kind of like bright pink everywhere. It's more intermediate. And that's because those different pieces balance each other out. I just wanted to explain that piece.
Which I appreciate.
Yeah.
Because I'm very concerned about how our policies really affect the populations that are currently living there and whether we're just replacing them with some new people. If the median rent for Blacks people as of, I think it's 2021 in the Racial Equity Report, was $1,090, which would put them in the very low income band to the low income band where the rent would be $1,270. And there are only X many apartments, for that income band, and then 20% of that. I know there's nothing we can do about the 20% now because that was in agreement with the federal government over the whole issue of the local waiver that the federal government decided was in violation of our discrimination policies. But how do we, or why do we then put MIH over the whole rezoned area if the MIH rent prices, by and large, are going to be higher than what many of the people who face the most displacement risk can afford?
Yeah, so I hear that question. I think a couple of things to just call out there. I think when we're talking about the price of these apartments, the price of MIH apartments, I think one, already said this before, right? Increasing the amount of permanently stabilized, permanently rent stabilized housing, that's not going to happen without new development. And then that's obviously being supplemented by trying to keep residents in their homes with stronger tenant protections. But to specifically talk about, who's living here and who might be moving into these rent stabilized apartments or how that might work, I think, wanted to point out that the median income in Crown Heights is $84,000 now, and $84,000 happens to be, when we say option 1 of MIH, which is average at 60% of AMI, 60% of AMI for a family of 3 is $84,000. So that tells all of us that, Crown Heights residents are essentially they are within that realm. And I hear you that median income doesn't tell the whole story, and I think you're right, it doesn't tell the whole story, but I think we can comfortably assume that with MIH, which serves generally, 60 is the average, so we're going from, 40 at the bottom all the way down to 100 at the top. When we're talking about 40% AMI, that's 56,000 for a family of three. And so that is, closer to the kind of income range that you're describing. And I think there are a range of incomes of folks that live there now, a range of incomes that we hope to serve in the future. And we would be bolstering, MIH isn't the only tool. We would be bolstering that with a deeply affordable housing on the 3 public sites that you already heard about. We're continually trying to identify additional sites. I think a couple other things that I'll point out, and then I'll stop talking. I'm
interested in this. So
okay, so a couple other things I do want to point out. So I think really important to point out that some upcoming policy changes that are also going to have an impact here. So one is that City of Yes for Housing Opportunity is going to introduce option 3 of MIH as a standalone option. So right now it has to be mapped alongside 1 or 2, but in the future, if that, is approved, we would get to an average of 40%. So that means, again, that family of 3 at 56,000, that could be the average for the 20% set aside for affordable housing. So that, as you heard, is one of the options that's being mapped here. So let's keep that in mind as an option or a direction that this could head. I think would also point out that 485X, the 421A replacement program, would be capped at 100% of AMI rather than the prior 130%. So we're trending towards, with these kind of like larger citywide policies, we're going to be supplementing the specific programs that we're developing here, trending towards deeper affordability.
And I hear what you're saying, and I appreciate it, but I still have this concern that we are aiding in the 80% or 75% or 70% in the upward trend of the market rents, which will be affecting those who are seeking housing who don't get into our assisted housing, that we are actually a force to drive rents up in the rest of the neighborhood because the market rate rents are going up.
Yeah, and I think that's where we just need to come back to this area actually does have a sizable amount of rent stabilized housing, hence those housing conditions being the stabilizing factor in our displacement risk, and the fact that we are, going to be deploying people across the neighborhood to educate people about knowing their rights and working with people to form tenant associations. We hope that we can preserve those existing households in those affordable homes.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Love to discuss this with you in greater detail. You may have heard I did vote against the MIH in the Brooklyn Yards project for just this reason, that I thought that it would tend to increase rents overall in a community whose existing rents were lower. But thank you very much, all of you.
If I could, I'll just really quickly add that over the past 20, 30 years, we've seen a dramatic increase in demand to live in central Brooklyn, and that has existed on top of units created through past area-wide rezonings, on top of Pacific Park, Atlantic Yards. So I think we definitely hear you loud and clear about, how is this supporting the residents who are already there, but we just want to emphasize that the status quo right now without any changes is there's increasing pressure across the board, and there's a tremendous demand for housing overall. So we just want to.
Right, and I was going to say that.
Is that demand being created by the people who are living there, or is that demand being created by people who want to move there, who are also pushing the incomes up? That's just something to think about. I don't think you can. And last but not least, which is for Dan, we see a lot of EISs that have significant impacts, and we're going to see possible mitigations between draft and final, or they're going to examine them between draft and final, but we don't actually get them until the final, which is when we're voting. So it would be helpful when we have them if maybe during the public hearing or during the review session at the public hearing, there is a discussion of what those mitigation measures that they have studied between draft and final look like, so we would have an opportunity to think about them, ask questions, and talk about them.
Okay, I'm going to have Stephanie jump in on that.
Sure,
Go ahead.
sure. I'll just note that, it's required that we have the FEIS due 10 days before.
Right.
Oftentimes, we're really working on mitigation measures up until that deadline. But we usually try to leave at least one post-hearing follow-up with as much of the information from the FEIS that can be discussed at the time. So we'll aim to do that so that there can be as much of a discussion as possible prior to the vote. So we'll aim for that. But
Thank you.
You can see this is complicated. There's so many agencies involved, and there's a lot of infrastructure concerns, as we talked about.
It's just complicated for us too, and then without anybody to really bounce ideas or questions off of, it's hard.
Yeah, understood.
Thank you.
Thanks, Stephanie. Thank you, Commissioner. I just want to redirect, before I go back to Commissioner Osorio, I just wanted to see if you, Jonah, or Sarit would say just another word or two about the interaction between demand and displacement risk as a general matter. And I think you were, you said it a moment ago, Jonah, but the notion of housing creation as a tool to mitigate against displacement risk is something that has been studied rather extensively and has suggested that housing creation is an important way to be able to address some of these issues. I just wanted to see if you could say a little bit more about that.
Sure. I'll maybe
Sure.
start, or do you want to start? Yeah.
I'm happy to answer. I think you might be able to supplement. So yeah, I think, I think the way HPD approaches this is that, and as I mentioned before, is that we really view that there could be multiple factors causing displacement risk in a given area. Obviously, you saw our, multiple factors of the displacement risk index. And, within those, I think we never know exactly whether it's, the specifically constrained amount of housing or the vulnerable population. We never know exactly which factor it is or that is causing that, which is why we do take, that's why we take a multi-pronged approach. And there isn't just one tool. It's not just create new housing. You are solving your housing crisis. There are multiple housing crises, and we need to try and solve all of them at the same time between, creating new housing, specifically new affordable housing or permanently affordable housing, creating new, also working on, tenant protections, also thinking about broader citywide policy issues. And so I think all I can really say is that we recognize the complexity of this, and that's why we're operating on multiple scales and multiple levels and really working hard to do the best we can here in this neighborhood.
And I'll just say what Dan alluded to is that recently with Berman Center at NYU, Lewis Center at UCLA, we've had a few groundbreaking studies that have looked macro and micro scales of the relationship between increasing housing and changes in rent. And so they've really elucidated what we see now where, as you alluded to, Commissioner, what's driving this? And I think what the heart of a lot of the studies show is that it's not necessarily the new development itself, it's kind of the underlying demand for housing. And that could be due to people, workers moving to the city and needing to find housing close to transit, and Atlantic Terminal in Brooklyn is a natural place for that. Or it could be, folks who maybe live in nearby neighborhoods but want to move to Prospect Heights and there's a lack of availability, and so they're looking at different areas nearby. But it's that underlying demand which is driving so much of our housing, and if you look at the racial equity report, there's a really helpful chart that shows the AMI levels, and it's skewed where some of at the lower AMIs, there are a lot of, as you said, residents who are 30 or 40% AMI. But what we also see is a lot of AMI levels at the higher end, and that's could be partly Prospect Heights, and it's a more affluent area, but it also shows that there's just tremendous demand for new housing, and so the creation of housing where the zoning strictly prohibits it today, we think can go a long way towards addressing that, but doing it in a thoughtful approach that kind of balances different types of housing, public sites, private sites, MIH, other term sheets. So we're trying to do our best, but kind of throwing all the different tools that we have to address this.
Thank you, Jonah. All right, let me go to Commissioner Osorio.
Thank you, Chair, so much, and thank you both for acknowledging the complexity of the narrative here and for incorporating that as you're thinking through and presenting the proposals, particularly to the public, where, I think both of you have really underscored and referenced how planning has had intended and unintended consequences here. In building on your response to Commissioner Benjamin, and maybe this is a question more for HPD, as you're combing through all the different tools, all the different opportunities in addressing all the different causes that you've laid out, the one thing that you haven't mentioned, and you don't have to answer, today unless you have anything that you can share with us right now, this is more of a comment for as we move forward. But I think that this is an opportunity to address the protection of current tenants as much as it is about thinking creatively about protecting or prioritizing the right to return. And so I know that this is complex and we are constrained, but this is perhaps one of those opportunities based on everything that Commissioner Benjamin laid out where it would go a really long way. So I don't know if there's anything that you can share with us right now. If not, again, a question that I would love to sort of engage with later.
Sure, and thank you for that question. Of course, we've all been talking about the loss of longtime residents in this area, specifically Black population, and so this is top of mind of who has left, who has remained, and why that we are grappling with. I think when it comes to kind of special tools to allow the right of formerly displaced residents to return, we don't have something in our toolbox right now. I think as you pointed out, Commissioner Benjamin, our best tool to date really has, or not to return, but for new housing to kind of ensure that existing residents are the ones who are kind of making it through the housing lottery and getting those units has been community preference, which has been reduced from 50 to 20%. I think given that the broader policy environment has been trending towards a reduction in community preference, and that was based on questions related to unintended racial segregation or reinforcing that and fair housing concerns. I think it's a challenging environment to suggest strengthening those tools or making them even kind of more specific by not just people who live there, but kind of adding folks who lived there previously. So I think it's a difficult environment to create new tools specifically for that. However, I think that the strengthened tenant protections that we're working on through Partners in Preservation and other tools are really what will help us make sure that we don't repeat past errors and we don't end up with further residents displaced.
Thank you. The point taken, I understand the constraints. It's just that it's not unprecedented. Urban renewal laws used to include that. So maybe there's an opportunity to think through and see what of that is something that we can, build on. But understood point. I understand the constraints. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner. Let me go to Commissioner Kermani.
Thank you. I just have a quick comment, and thank you so much for all the work done on this. And I see it also as a move towards more comprehensive planning, and which I think is fantastic. I just want to address a little bit of home ownership, and then Black people leaving Bed-Stuy, particularly as a long-term resident of Bed-Stuy, and a husband who grew up there in the 60s and 70s, and a mother-in-law who owned a brownstone there forever until she sold it before the market changed. We don't discuss it, actually. We don't. But I think it is a complicated narrative, and it's even more complicated than that. And I think it's really important to fill out the narrative, right? And I appreciate that that's what we're doing. I think it's incredibly important. And I think some of the departure is also that there are fewer Black brownstone owners in Bed-Stuy than there were. As my mother-in-law was a part-time accountant and was able to buy a brownstone, right? That's not happening anymore. And so as Black homeowners are leaving. While I have no statistic in front of me, I'm sure I could find it, but we'll say that those brownstones are not being bought by other Black people.
Right.
And so that it's not only that the rental population is turning over, it's also the homeowners are turning over, and that affects the rental population. So I think there is that factor. It's not a suggestion, it's not a question, it's just this is a complex, broad narrative of unintended and intended segregation and displacement.
Thank you, Commissioner. Okay, we'll have that be the last word for today. Let me just thank the team, both the city planning team and, of course, also our sister agency at HPD. We very much appreciate their partnership and support here, and we'll pick this one up through the process as we are now certified. So thank you very much to the AMUP team, and we'll look forward to seeing you down the line. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Sarah, let's go to the next item of the day.
Okay. The second item on our agenda is a certification of a zoning map and zoning text amendments in Queens Community District 6. Our presenter is Andrew Wasserman.
All right, Andrew, welcome.
Testing 1, 2. All right. Can you hear myself? All right. So just want to manage expectations. This project is of a much smaller scale than the conversation that we just finished. So just don't want anyone to be disappointed. Excuse me. Next slide, please. Oh, I do that. Sorry. Forgot that I have this. There we go. I'm in control. Okay. Anyway, off to a great start. Forgetting technology exists. Excuse me. This is a private application by QBM Properties, LLC, for a zoning map and zoning text amendment to change the existing R71/C12 to an R8X/C24 zoning district, an R71/C12 to just an R71 zoning district, and to map MIH to facilitate a new 184,042 square foot, 17-story plus cellar mixed-use residential building with first floor commercial at 10251 Queens Boulevard in Forest Hills, Community District 6, Queens. The proposed development will have approximately 216 dwelling units, of which 54 would be income restricted. It will also include approximately 87 accessory vehicular parking spaces, and the project area is located in Councilmember Lynn Schulman's district. The project area, highlighted here in red, is located in Forest Hills, Queens. The neighborhood is largely comprised of residential, commercial, and community facility uses, bounded by Rego Park to the west, the Long Island Expressway to the north, the Grand Central Parkway to the east, and Union Turnpike to the south. The 1 3/4 acre Yellowstone Park is located 1 block east of the project area, and the roughly 900 acre Flushing Meadows Corona Park is located about 3/4 of a mile east of the project area. The area is well served by public transit. The 67th Avenue stop serving the M and R subway lines is just over 1 block northwest of the project area on Queens Boulevard. The Forest Hills 71st Avenue stop serving the E, F, M, and R subway lines is located about 6 blocks southwest of the project area, and 1 block south of that is the Forest Hills LIRR station. Numerous bus lines also serve the area. The project area was mapped R71 with a C12 commercial overlay in 1961 and has not been modified since that time. The area surrounding the project area is mapped with an R71 zoning district and mostly consists of 6-story multifamily residential buildings. The area further to the east is mapped with an R12A zoning district and primarily consists of single-family houses and community facilities such as schools and religious institutions. The area to the south and west of the project area, south of Queens Boulevard, is mapped with an R4B zoning district and mostly consists of single and two-family attached row houses and semi-detached buildings. Queens Boulevard is a principal arterial thoroughfare that travels northwest to southeast through the borough of Queens and contains primarily residential and commercial uses and a variety of densities. It is a 200-foot wide street characterized with multifamily residential buildings that generally rise between 6 and 13 stories. However, there are 4 20-story apartment buildings immediately south of the project area, and several apartment buildings of similar height in either direction along Queens Boulevard. The blocks along Queens Boulevard, including and adjacent to the project area, are zoned with a C12 commercial overlay and generally contain single-story commercial buildings with retail uses. Here is an aerial image showing the existing conditions of the site. The project area, outlined in the black dotted line, includes the block front along Queens Boulevard between 68th Avenue to the north, 68th Road to the south. It includes, block 2137, lots 1, 6, 8, 11, and part of lots 13 and 46. The development site, outlined in red, consists only of lots 1, 6, 8, and 11, all of which are owned by the applicant and improved with single-story commercial buildings. The remainder of the project area, lots 13 and 46, are non-applicant controlled lots that contain 6-story multifamily residential buildings. We'll discuss those later in the presentation. The single-story commercial buildings on the development site have uses that serve the local community, including restaurants, a bank, and an urgent care facility. The development site has approximately 208 feet of frontage on Queens Boulevard. In the bottom right corner of this image, we can see one of the previously mentioned 20-story residential buildings. The project area has frontage on Queens Boulevard, which, as previously mentioned, is a 200-foot wide street, between 68th Avenue and 68th Road, which are both 60-foot wide streets. Now we'll see some images of existing conditions. This photo looks west from 68th Road towards the project area, showing one of the adjacent apartment buildings, which is not included in the redevelopment. We also see some of the businesses that currently exist on the development site. This photo looks northeast from Queens Boulevard towards the project area, showing some of the businesses that currently exist on the development site and some of the nearby apartment buildings. Here's another view looking southeast from Queens Boulevard towards the project area, again showing the single-story commercial buildings and businesses on the development site. And this photo looks southwest from 68th Avenue towards the project area, showing an adjacent apartment building, not included in the redevelopment, and also the parking lot behind the single-story commercial buildings, which is part of the development site, and the existing curb cut there. The proposed development is a 17-story plus cellar mixed-use residential building with first-floor commercial with approximately 184,000 square feet of total floor area. The ground floor level will contain approximately 17,800 square feet of commercial space, as well as the residential lobby and a ramp to the second-story parking area. The 3rd through 17th floors will contain approximately 216 dwelling units, including 54 income-restricted units pursuant to MAH Option 1. The proposed development will include approximately 87 accessory vehicular parking spaces divided between the cellar and second floor. Here we see a cross-section of the proposed development viewed from Queens Boulevard. The proposed development would rise to a maximum height of 175 feet with 10-foot setbacks provided at the 7th and 9th floors at heights of 75 feet and 95 feet respectively. This is the ground floor plan for the proposed development. Shown here is the residential lobby, commercial space, and the ramp to the second-story parking area. Pedestrian access to the residential lobby would be provided on Queens Boulevard. Commercial space would be accessible for pedestrians on all frontages of the proposed development, and a new 22-foot curb cut will replace an existing curb cut on 60th Avenue to provide access to the ramp to the second-floor parking area, and a new 12-foot curb cut would be provided on 60th Road, providing access to the cellar parking. To facilitate the proposed development, the applicant is proposing a zoning map amendment from R71/C12 to an R8X/C24 zoning district on the lots that encompass the development site. R8X districts are contextual residential zoning districts which require quality housing regulations and permit a maximum FAR of 7.2 with inclusionary housing. They also allow a maximum building height of 170 feet or 175 feet with a qualifying ground floor. The applicant is also proposing to reduce the depth of the commercial overlay to 100 feet from Queens Boulevard along 60th Road, effectively rezoning small portions of the adjacent lots 13 and 46 from R71/C12 to just R71. Lot 13, fronting 60th Avenue, contains a 6-story multifamily residential building with 86 dwelling units. Approximately 1,220 square feet, or 5% of this lot, that small triangle on the left, is zoned R71/C12 and would be rezoned to just R71. Lot 46, which is below Lot 13 in this image, fronting 60th Road, contains a 6-story multifamily residential building with 81 dwelling units. Approximately 4,060 square feet, or 20% of this lot, is zoned R71/C12 and again would be rezoned to just R71. In addition to the zoning map amendment, the applicant is proposing a zoning text amendment to map MIH on the site pursuant to options 1 and 2. Shaded in gray on the right side of this map, the MIH boundary would be coterminous with the boundary of the proposed R8X zoning district, encompassing the development site. The MIH boundary does not include the portions of the adjacent lots within the project area where the depth of the commercial overlay is proposed to be reduced. This application requires a racial equity report because it would increase the residential floor area by at least 50,000 square feet. The estimated annual median income for Queens Community District 6 is approximately $91,000, which is higher than the median incomes for the Borough of Queens and New York City overall. Under MIH Option 1, the applicant proposes to provide 54 income-restricted units at an average of 60% AMI, with estimated monthly rents ranging from $850 for studios to $2,940 for 3-bedroom units, at estimated average incomes ranging from $39,600 for a 1-bedroom household to $122,000 for a 5-person household, based on 2023 figures. Of the approximately 120,000 residents within Queens Community District 6, 31% identify as Asian, 3% identify as Black non-Hispanic, 16% identify as Hispanic or Latino, and 44% identify as White non-Hispanic. Between 2010 and 2022, the district saw a 7% increase in total population. This included a 27% increase in the Asian population, a 24% increase in the Black non-Hispanic population, and a 30% increase in the Hispanic or Latino population, while the White non-Hispanic population decreased by 15%. In conclusion, the applicant proposes a zoning map amendment to change from an R71/C12 district to an R8X/C24 district, and an R71/C12 district to an R71 zoning district, as well as a zoning text amendment to map an MIH area to facilitate the development of a new 17-story mixed-use building with a total of approximately 216 dwelling units, including 54 income-restricted units. This concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to take questions.
Great, thanks. Just a couple from me. Can you just say a little bit more about why R8X as opposed to any other designation here?
Thank you for that question. Per the applicant, R8X provides a fairly flexible building envelope, which they felt would be appropriate on a wide street such as Queens Boulevard with good transit access. And given a similar built context existing along Queens Boulevard, including those 20-story apartment buildings roughly across the street, they mentioned there's also precedent with recent R8X rezoning about 4 blocks northwest with a similar project currently under construction. And that building is about 15 stories.
Great. And what's the parking situation here?
The current one, or? Oh, sorry. Yes. They're proposing approximately 87 parking spaces.
And what's required?
Required currently is 73 parking spaces, so they plan to exceed that requirement by 14 spaces.
Just noting that for public consumption of another application, which is going above the minimum. Okay, thank you. Let me go to Commissioner Benjamin.
Thank you.
Quick question following up on something the chair asked. In one of the slides, you show a picture of the existing conditions, and there are a number of cars parked behind the stores, what looks like the stores on Queens Boulevard there. Are those cars attendant to the residential parking that's there, or attendant to the stores on Queens Boulevard?
It's my understanding that those are, it's accessory parking for those stores on Queens Boulevard.
And that will be going away?
That is correct.
And are the stores required to have accessory parking?
That's a very good question.
Okay, well, if you could get the answer to me as to how this is going to affect Queens Boulevard and the retail operations there, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, I can definitely do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Marin?
I think I tuned out for a second, but I think you had the same question, which is, I understand the difference between the 73 acquired, the 87 being provided, and I wanted to know if you could break it out between residential and commercial. I'm assuming that the commercial does require some parking, and there's an amount that's required with the residential. If you had that number now, that'd be great. Otherwise, if you can provide it later, that would be perfect.
That's definitely something that I should have on me. I don't have that at the moment, but can definitely get back to you with that.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, great. Well, thank you. This item's certified, and we'll pick it up down the line. Appreciate those follow-ups.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Sarah, let's go to the next.
The third item on our agenda is a post-referral review for a non-ULURP authorization in Manhattan Community District 5. Our presenter is Ezra Mosier on Zoom.
Okay.
Hello, Ezra.
Hi, how's it going? All right. Good afternoon, Commissioners. This is a post-referral presentation for the Flatiron Buildings conversion authorization. As you can see, it is slated to be voted out tomorrow, 10/16. It was shown to the Commission on September 23rd. And the applicant is the Brodsky organization, and the requested action is an authorization to allow for the conversion of vacant commercial office floor area to residential floor area in portions of the Flatiron building, which is also located at 175 Fifth Ave. As noted, it's in Manhattan Community District 5. Next slide, please. Thank you. So again, 175 Fifth Avenue. It's located on block 851, lot 1. It's in the C64M zoning district, and the specific authorization is subject to pursuant to 1520B, which again allows the residential conversion of, in this case, floors 2 through 22 of the Flatiron building to residential. Next slide, please. So on October 10th, Manhattan CP5 voted to recommend approval of the proposal without conditions, 28 votes in favor, 0 abstaining, and 0 against. Next slide, please. So again, this is the Flatiron building that we're talking about. Doesn't particularly need much of an introduction. It is highlighted in purple here. It's on a triangular block where it's the only building bounded by Broadway to the east, Fifth Avenue to the west, East 23rd Street to the north, although that does become West 23rd Street at Fifth Avenue, and then East 22nd Street to the south. And the surrounding area is primarily commercial and mixed commercial / residential in use. Next slide, please. So here we're oriented actually due north of the site, looking due south. The Flatiron building's highlighted in yellow. Madison Square Park is clearly visible in the foreground. And the building was a single tenant. It had a single commercial tenant occupied by the Macmillan Publishing Group's headquarters, who vacated in 2019. And the building above grade has been vacant since then. There were some attempts by ownership to begin a gut renovation of the building in order to attract a new office tenant. These were unsuccessful, which sent the property to auction. And the difficulty in attracting commercial tenants, given its irregular layouts, led the new ownership to pursue a residential conversion. Next slide, please. So the requested action results in 39 dwelling units across 181,000 zoning square feet of floor area. This shows a typical layout. Again, floors 2 through 22 would be converted fully to residential with 2 units per floor, and these would likely be upscale condominiums. Next slide, please. And this is a view of the proposed ground floor. The retail lobby would occupy a majority of the ground floor. Retail would occupy a majority of the ground floor, while the balance would be dedicated to the residential lobby. Next slide, please. So the applicant requests a section 1520B authorization to waive the preservation requirements, which are currently in section 1521, which would facilitate the residential conversion. Section 1521 requires that buildings that have between 5,000 and 10,000 square feet of lot area, the Flatiron building has 8,000 square feet of lot area, that are located in a C6 foreign district, as this is, to preserve 50% of their floor area for conforming non-residential uses. Section 1520B, which this application is made pursuant to, permits the modification and or waiver of these provisions. Generally speaking, the findings are that the subject building is an LPC designated landmark, which is the case here, that any and all alterations obtain a certificate of appropriateness from LPC, which they have, that a continuing maintenance program is established for the landmark, which has been done, and that the residential density comply with the density requirements pertinent to 74 711 applications. Additionally, the commission must find that the waiver will have a minimal adverse impact on the conforming uses located both within the building and in the surrounding area. And it's worth noting here again that the building itself has been vacant since 2019, and the surrounding area is a healthy mix of commercial, residential, and residential. So that concludes the presentation. Are there any questions on this?
Any questions for Ezra? Okay, Ezra, you're off the hook. Thank you very much. And we are going to schedule this for a vote tomorrow, correct?
Yes, we will have a supplemental calendar. We'll share that with you this evening.
Great. Thank you very much. Let's move on to the next item.
Thank you.
The fourth item on our agenda is laid over. Okay. So the fifth item on our agenda is a pre-hearing review of an acquisition and site selection in Brooklyn Community District 7. Our presenter is Juki Sai.
All right, Juki, welcome back.
Thank you. Good afternoon. This is an application for a site selection and acquisition action jointly sought by the New York City Administration for Children's Services and the New York City Department of Citywide Administrative Services, DCAS, to facilitate a 17,900 square foot trade shop for construction and repair of fixtures and furniture used at ACS facilities across the city, as well as roughly 1,300 square feet of space on the adjacent parking lot at 850 3rd Avenue in Sunset Park, Community District 7, Brooklyn. This application certified on August 19th, 2024, and the public hearing for it is tomorrow. Community Board 7 did not hear this item and submitted a waiver of recommendation. On September 25th, 2024, the Borough President held a public hearing, and on September 26th, 2024, submitted a recommendation to approve the application with no conditions. Thank you. I'll take any questions.
Questions? Mr. Mann?
Can you just remind me who the owner of the building is in this case?
It's Salmar Properties.
Yeah. So I don't know how the commission and the department are thinking about the sort of, it's not really a question for Juki, but the sort of press around the city's acquisition of office space and how we should be thinking appropriately about handling that set of questions. But it does raise, I think, concerns for me that we're just making sure that we're not complicit in anything that felt inappropriate or was inappropriate. And so I just would ask the department to give that some thought in terms of how we should be thinking about that.
Sure thing. I'll jump in to say that, what we are evaluating here is a question of land use. Is it appropriate? Is it not appropriate? And if you want to pose questions about how The site was identified to the applicant tomorrow. That's certainly a reasonable question. But for us, I think the question most fundamentally is it appropriate here? Is this an appropriate use? But yes, understood the point, and certainly we'll have an applicant before us tomorrow who can certainly address that. Other questions? Okay, great, thanks. We'll pick this one up for a public hearing. Thank you, Juki.
Thank you.
Sarah, what's next?
The sixth item on our agenda is a City Council modification scope determination for the 135th Street rezoning. The City Council proposes to modify the zoning text amendment to Appendix F, removing option 2, and staff believes this modification is within scope.
Any questions on this one? Okay. All right, I'm going to seek assent by a voice vote to send a letter to the council if these modifications are in fact within scope. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Okay, the ayes have it. Thank you. With an extra one on Zoom. Thank you very much, Commissioner Reprashad. It was a slight delay there, but your vote is duly noted. Thank you. Okay, Sarah, what's next?
All right, future votes. Future votes for consideration tomorrow, October 16th. We have a SNAD authorizations for 5501 Palisade Avenue and a SNAD CPC certification for 1 Blackstone Place, both in the Bronx Community District 8. Briefing materials were provided in your weekend materials. Okay. Staff have prepared a report for 14 Wall Street, which had a public hearing at the September 25th public meeting, and Trevor is here to present.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. This will be very brief. As Sarah mentioned, this project is scheduled to be voted on tomorrow's public meeting. The New York City Department of Citywide Administrative Services and the Department for the Aging propose a 20-year lease of roughly 80,000 square feet of modern office space at 14 Wall Street and a planned relocation of DIFTA's present headquarters at 2 Lafayette Street. Approval of this acquisition action by the City Planning Commission is required for DCAS and DIFTA to proceed with the lease agreement pursuant to Section 195C of the New York City Charter. Department staff are in support of this application. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Sarah, what's next?
Okay. Lastly, for future votes, staff have prepared reports for Port Authority Bus Terminal replacement. There was a memo in your weekend materials, and Ben is here to present.
All right, Ben, welcome back.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Wait, I got a few slides today. So just a reminder, this is an application by the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey to facilitate the reconstruction of the Port Authority Bus Terminal in Manhattan Community District 4, and we are scheduled for a vote tomorrow. So very short agenda today. I want to discuss some final modifications to the urban design controls that we discussed at the post-hearing, have a quick update on the EIS, and then give the department's recommendation on the application. So just to review, for this new facility, there are 3 requested actions that the Port Authority is seeking: a zoning text amendment that will incorporate a new section to the bus station special permit with updated findings related to a modern bus facility, a special permit as modified by the proposed text amendment, and a city map amendment involving the elimination of specific volumes on portions of streets and avenues and the disposition of such demapped areas to the Port Authority. With approval of the requested actions, the development site would be considered a single zoning lot. So as we discussed at the post-hearing, the department went into additional detail on the urban design controls for overstreet bridging elements. Originally, the design controls only influenced mechanical equipment on the roof that was visible from the street, and that equipment should be incorporated within the volume of the building as much as possible. So through the public review process, we advised the Commission that we considered modifying the language to include mechanical equipment on the underside of these overstreet elements. So the applicant has modified the drawings to reflect this request, and the application drawings have been updated to reflect these modifications. Similarly, we discussed the urban design controls for streetscape, specifically for frontage zones B and C, which control the corner of West 40th Street and 9th Avenue. The department believes this entrance, although secondary, is nonetheless critically important as both a local neighborhood entrance as well as a gateway to points west, such as Hudson Yards. We had discussed alternates the applicant could pursue that we felt would improve these entrances. The applicant worked with both the department and the community board on an updated design, which we have here on this slide. They have updated the site plan and the urban design controls to include wider entrances on 9th Avenue and West 40th Street, double height entrances, and the entrances are slightly recessed to create improved visual cues of these entrances on this particular corner. So this is just to zoom in on the updated urban design controls text that codify the changes in the entrances we just showed in the site plan. We believe these modifications have improved the site plan. So for the EIS, the Federal Transit Administration and the Port Authority completed an environmental impact statement to assess the potential benefits and effects of building the proposed project. The FEIS was published on October 4th, 2024, so after our post-hearing. The final FEIS identified significant impacts with respect to historic and cultural resources, shadows, transportation, and construction. The materials are available on the Port website. So the department supports the requested actions that compromise the Port Authority's application, which would facilitate the reconstruction of the Port Authority bus terminal together with a new storage and staging facility and a ramp structure connecting the Lincoln Tunnel to the new facilities. Rebuilding the facility in its current location capitalizes on the station's great proximity to the Midtown Central Business District and extensive connections to transit options. The proposed actions are appropriate for a new world-class bus terminal and overbuild towers within the context of the surrounding area and the site's history as a major transit hub. The plan to replace the Port Authority bus terminal has been in development for quite some time. The process has involved extensive planning and technical analysis by the Port Authority, thorough evaluations and modification requests from various city agencies, as well as valuable feedback from the community. The department has worked closely with the Port Authority to develop the urban design controls that are part of the special permit, which will ensure that the new facility provides lively, active frontages, generous entrances, and design features that complement the vibrant public realm and streetscapes of the surrounding neighborhood. The requested special permit, text amendment, and city map changes are necessary to facilitate an improved bus station that will achieve operational efficiencies as well as an improved public realm and grand civic facility that New Yorkers deserve. The actions sought are appropriate and would facilitate the replacement of the current outdated and outmoded Port Authority bus terminal with a modern grand facility that will better serve New Yorkers and those who travel to New York City for work and pleasure. That's our presentation, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Great, thanks very much. I have questions from Commissioner Osorio, but before I do, I just want to express my appreciation to you and the team for all of your efforts to make this happen in the time frame that we are in and recognizing the complexity of all of this. So thank you. And I also want to express my particular satisfaction with the resolution of the entrances at 40th Street and 9th Avenue, which I think was a piece which needed some work. And I think that this both respects the desires of the local community and community board while also making sure that we have a grand civic space at and around this intersection. So I wanted to just say that out loud. Okay, go ahead, Commissioner.
Thank you, Chair. I very much agree with what you just said. I think that I wanted to thank you for your help and for your advice in terms of like navigating the information. Also, I think that what you said is really well said in terms of the willingness of the applicant to acknowledge, engage, and reflect some of the recommendations. The question that it's more like it's a recommendation for the report. Thank you so much for the follow-up in terms of the open spaces associated with the Dyer Avenue deck overs. I think that, we have to understand the constraints in where we are right now. However, I feel that our report should be more explicit in reflecting what the applicant said in the memo. In our report on page 19, we're literally just saying that the Port Authority will, at a later date, determine how these open spaces will be designed. But the letter, I think, is a little more explicit in recognizing and acknowledging that they will be working with the community and that there's going to be a public process to do that. I think it'll be important for our report to be explicit about it, as well as, I think, echoing the sentiment and the recommended requests, really, that we got or that we heard from the community, specifically as it relates to mitigating the impacts and what's going to be the process for that. I mean, it's understood that the open space here is outside of that conversation, but our report, I think, should be explicit in terms of clarity, in terms of how the community will engage, what will be the process to determine those mitigation actions that span beyond what we're looking at right now, but are still important.
Thank you for that. Noted, and we will update the report accordingly. I think that's good feedback.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Ben. Excellent. And we will pick this one up for a vote tomorrow. Thank you. Sarah, what else do we have today?
Sarah, there are no other items today.
Any further announcements?
No announcements.
Okay. With that, thank you all very much. We will see you at 10 o'clock for our public hearings and votes, and we are adjourned.
The time is 3:54 p.m.
Thank you.